The desert sun burned like judgment as Clara Whitmore stood at the crossroads, her dying horses labored breathing, the only sound in the vast emptiness. 3 days without proper water. No settlement in sight. The map her dead husband had clutched in his final moments now felt like a cruel joke in her trembling hands. She was 26 years old and about to become another nameless grave marker in this godforsaken wilderness. Then, hoofbeats. A single rider materialized through the shimmering heat haze, and Clara's hand instinctively moved to the pistol hidden in her skirts. Stay with me until the end of this story. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Clara's journey reaches across the world. The rider came closer, and Clara's finger tightened near the trigger. In the Arizona territory of 1873, a woman alone was either prey or a fool, and she'd be damned if she'd be easy pickings for road agents or worse. But as the figure took shape through the wavering heat, she saw no gang, no weapons drawn, just a single man on a chestnut mare, riding with the easy confidence of someone who belonged to this brutal landscape. He reined up about 20 feet away, respectful of her space, and pushed back his hat to reveal a weathered face that could have been anywhere between 30 and 50. Sun-carved lines radiated from eyes the color of creek stone, and his jaw carried several days of stubble dusted with trail dirt. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low and careful, the kind of voice you'd use approaching a spooked animal. "Saw your tracks about 3 miles back. Nobody rides this trail unless they're lost or desperate. You look like maybe both." Clara said nothing, studying him. His clothes were worn but well kept. Leather vest over a faded blue shirt, trousers that had seen hard use but recent mending. A working man then, ranch hand or small holder. The kind who measured worth in sweat and seasons, not silver in schemes. "Name's Caleb Ridge," he continued when she didn't respond. "I run cattle about 8 miles northeast of here. Your horse doesn't look like he's got another mile in him, and if you'll pardon my saying so, ma'am, neither do you." The horse, Samuel, named for her husband because she couldn't bear to let the name die completely, chose that moment to shudder and nearly buckle. Clara's heart clenched. The animal had carried her nearly 40 miles beyond what anyone could reasonably ask. She couldn't watch him die of thirst because of her stubborn pride. "I have water," she said finally, her voice hoarse from 3 days of rationing. "Not much, but some. That right?" Caleb dismounted in one fluid motion and approached slowly, hands visible and empty. "How much is not much?" She gestured to the nearly flat canteen hanging from Samuel's saddle. Caleb picked it up, shook it, and his expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "Ma'am, this isn't going to get you to wherever you're headed. Hell, it won't get you through sundown." He pulled his own canteen, full and heavy, from his saddle and held it out. "Here." Clara stared at the offered water like it might bite her. "I don't take charity." "It ain't charity, it's common sense. You die of thirst out here, you become buzzard food and a story that gets told in saloons. I'm trying to prevent both." He pushed the canteen closer. "Besides, I got a spring at my place. I can refill. You can't." The logic was irrefutable. Clara took the canteen with shaking hands and drank. Not too much, not too fast, the way her husband had taught her when they'd first started west. The water was warm but clean, tasting faintly of metal and salvation. "Thank you," she managed when she came up for air. "Don't mention it." Caleb turned his attention to Samuel, running experienced hands over the horse's legs and checking his hooves. "He's got the beginning of stone bruise on his left front. He's dehydrated, and I'd bet my best saddle he hasn't had decent feed in days. Where exactly were you planning on going?" Clara pulled the map from her traveling bag, a worn piece of surveyor's parchment with her husband's careful annotations in fading ink. "Redstone Valley. There's supposed to be a settlement there. I have a land claim. 160 acres under the Homestead Act." Caleb studied the map, his expression growing grimmer. "Redstone Valley. You know it?" "Know of it. It's real, if that's what you're asking. But ma'am," he chose his words carefully, "it's another 35, maybe 40 miles southeast of here, hard country. And the settlement, well, calling it that is generous. Last I heard, there were maybe 6 families trying to scratch out a living there, and they were losing the fight." The hope that had sustained Clara through every mile of this nightmare journey wavered like the heat haze. My husband researched it thoroughly. He said the land was good, arable, near water. He ever see it himself? The silence that followed was answer enough. Caleb sighed and handed the map back. Look, I don't know what promises were made to you or what dreams you're chasing, but the sun's already past noon and your horse won't make another 5 miles without rest and real water. My ranch is 2 hours northeast. You can water your horse, get a meal, maybe sleep in an actual bed instead of on hard ground. Come morning, if you still want to push on to Redstone Valley, I'll draw you a better map and pack you enough supplies to get there safe. Why would you do that? Clara asked, suspicion creeping into exhaustion. You don't know me. No, ma'am, I don't, but I knew my mother. She died crossing the Oregon Trail when I was 12. And the thing that killed her wasn't disease or East Indians or outlaws. It was pride. She wouldn't accept help from the wagon master when she took sick because she didn't want to be a burden. By the time she admitted she needed help, it was too late. His creekstone eyes met hers with unsettling directness. You've got that same look she had, that I'll handle this myself or die trying look. And I'm too old and too tired to watch another stubborn woman kill herself when accepting a hand wouldn't cost her anything but pride. The words hit harder than Clara wanted to admit. She looked at Samuel, at the endless expanse of scrub and rock and merciless sky, at the map with its optimistic lies. Then she looked at Caleb Ridge, this stranger who'd appeared like an answer to a prayer she hadn't dared speak. 2 hours? She asked. Give or take. We'll go easy because of your horse. I can pay. I have some money. Keep your money. Like I said, it's not charity. It's just what people do out here if they want to survive. He moved back to his mare and swung into the saddle. You ride and I'll lead your horse. He'll follow better if he's not carrying weight. Clara wanted to argue, but Samuel's legs were trembling with fatigue. She transferred what few belongings she could carry to Caleb's saddlebags, then mounted his mare while he took Samuel's reins. The horse followed with the resignation of an animal that had given everything and found someone willing to carry the burden forward. They rode in silence for the first hour. The landscape barely changed, endless variations of beige and brown, interrupted occasionally by stubborn sage or a weathered juniper clinging to life in the rocky soil. The sun hammered down without mercy, and Clara found herself grateful for the wide-brimmed hat Caleb had insisted she borrow. You come from back east? He asked eventually, his tone conversational, not prying. Philadelphia. My husband and I left 2 years ago. Long journey? Yes. He didn't make it. It wasn't a question, but Clara answered anyway. Cholera. In Kansas. We'd stopped at Fort Riley to resupply, and the disease was running through the emigrant camps. He lasted 4 days. She was surprised at how steady her voice remained. 4 months of traveling alone had worn grief down to something manageable, like a stone polished smooth by a river. He'd already filed the claim papers. All I had to do was get there and prove it up. That's a hard thing, Caleb said quietly. Losing your partner. Continuing on alone. Turning back felt like betraying him, like saying his dream wasn't worth finishing. And now? Clara didn't answer right away. She watched the horizon shimmer and dance, creating lakes that didn't exist and promises that dissolved on approach. Now, I don't know. I just know I couldn't stay in Philadelphia. There was nothing left for me there. Family? My parents died when I was young, fever. I was raised by my aunt, and she made it very clear that my marriage to a man with Western ambitions was a profound disappointment. When I returned after Samuel's death to settle affairs, she offered to take me back in, on the condition I acknowledge my poor judgment and accept a position as a seamstress in her friend's shop. The bitterness leaked through despite her best efforts. I would have been a living cautionary tale, the foolish niece who threw away a respectable life for adventure and got exactly what she deserved. So you chose the desert instead. I chose to finish what we started. Samuel believed we could build something out here, a real life, land of our own, a future we controlled, not one dictated by society's expectations. She paused. It seemed important to honor that. Caleb nodded slowly. And if the land's not what he believed, if Redstone Valley is just another broken promise, then I'll have my answer, won't I? I'll know I tried. That's one way to look at it, The other way is you'll have risked your life for something that was never yours to begin with. The words stung because they were true. The dream had been Samuel's. She'd followed because she loved him, because the alternative was the suffocating predictability of Philadelphia society, because anywhere seemed better than nowhere. But had she ever truly wanted this? The isolation, the danger, the constant uncertainty? "You think I'm foolish," she said flatly. "I think you're brave. There's a difference. Foolish people don't question themselves. Brave people do it every day and move forward anyway." He adjusted his hat against the declining sun. "Just seems to me that moving forward and moving in the right direction aren't always the same thing." They crested a low rise, and Clara saw it, a ribbon of green cutting through the brown wasteland, marking the path of water. Trees clustered along what must be a creek, and beyond them, the shapes of buildings huddled together like seekers sharing warmth. "That's Dry Creek Crossing," Caleb said. "Settlement of about 40 souls, give or take. We'll pass through on the way to my ranch. Don't be alarmed if folks stare. New faces are rare enough to be noteworthy." As they descended toward the settlement, Clara could make out more details. The main street, if you could call it that, was little more than a wide dirt track with buildings scattered along it in no particular order. A general store with a sagging porch. A blacksmith shop, the forge cold at this hour. What might have been a boarding house or saloon, the paint so faded the sign was illegible. A few houses set back from the road, most showing signs of hasty construction and hard use. People emerged as they rode through. A woman in a faded calico dress paused in hanging laundry. Two men repairing a corral fence stopped their work to watch. A clutch of children playing in the dirt looked up with wide, curious eyes. "Caleb!" A woman's voice rang out, and a figure in men's trousers and a work shirt emerged from the general store. She was perhaps 40, with iron gray hair pulled back in a no-nonsense braid, and the kind of weathered beauty that comes from years of hard living honestly faced. "Didn't expect to see you in town today." "Just passing through, Margaret. Picked up a traveler who needed assistance." Margaret's sharp eyes took in everything. Clara's dusty traveling dress, her Eastern-style boots, the exhausted horse being led behind them. "I see. Well, welcome to Dry Creek Crossing, miss. I'm Margaret Hartley. I run the general store and serve as the closest thing to a mayor this place has." "Clara Whitmore," Clara replied, trying not to feel like a specimen under examination. "Whitmore. That name's familiar. You wouldn't be the Clara Whitmore who has the Redstone Valley claim, would you? Filed under your husband's name, Samuel Whitmore?" Clara's surprise must have shown on her face. "How did you know that?" "Land office records pass through here on their way to the territorial office. I make it my business to know who's claiming what. Helps avoid disputes." Margaret's expression softened slightly. "I heard about your husband. Cholera is a cruel way to go. You have my condolences." "Thank you." "You planning on proving up that claim yourself?" "That's the intention, yes." Margaret exchanged a glance with Caleb that Clara couldn't quite read. "Well, that's ambitious. You have experience with frontier farming?" "I'm a quick learner." "I'm sure you are." Margaret's tone suggested she had opinions she was politely withholding. "Caleb, you taking her out to your place?" "Just for the night. Her horse needs rest and she needs a decent meal. Tomorrow I'll outfit her properly for the ride to Redstone Valley." Margaret crossed her arms. "Miss Whitmore, I don't mean to speak out of turn, but have you actually seen the Redstone Valley claim? In person?" "Not yet. But I have the surveyor's description. Surveyors describe what's there, not what's possible. And what's there in Redstone Valley is hardpan soil, unreliable water, and isolation that'll grind you down to nothing. 6 families tried to make a go of it. Last I heard, 4 had already given up and moved on." She held up a hand when Clara started to protest. "I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm saying it's nearly impossible, especially for a woman alone. You should know what you're walking into." The words landed like stones, each one adding to the weight Clara had been carrying since Kansas. But she lifted her chin, refusing to show how much they affected her. "I appreciate your concern, Mrs. Hartley, but I've come too far to turn back now." "Fair enough. Just wanted you to have the facts." Margaret turned to Caleb. "You're bringing her back through tomorrow?" "That's the plan." "Good. Stop by the store on your way. I'll have something for you." The way she said it suggested the something was more than just supplies. They rode on, leaving the settlement behind. The ranch appeared another half-hour later, a collection of sturdy buildings arranged around a central yard. The main house was low and wide, built of adobe and timber with a deep porch that promised shade and sanctuary. Beyond it stood a barn, a corral with several horses, and what looked like a bunkhouse. Chickens scattered as they approached, and a yellow dog emerged from the barn to greet them with enthusiastic barking. "Quiet, Jasper," Caleb commanded mildly, and the dog immediately settled into happy tail wagging instead. A young woman emerged from the house, wiping her hands on an apron. She had Caleb's same coloring, dark hair, strong features, but where his face was weathered into hardness, hers retained a softness that spoke of fewer years and perhaps a gentler temperament. "Caleb, you're back early. I wasn't expecting—" She stopped short when she saw Clara. "Oh. Sarah, this is Mrs. Clara Whitmore. Found her stranded on the Redstone Trail. Clara, this is my sister, Sarah Ridge." "Welcome," Sarah said immediately, her face breaking into a warm smile. "You look exhausted. Come inside, please. I'll heat water for washing and get you something to eat." "That's very kind, but I don't want to impose—" "Nonsense. It's no imposition at all. We rarely get visitors, and I'm delighted to have another woman to talk to. Caleb's conversation leaves much to be desired." She shot her brother an affectionate look that took the sting from the words. Caleb swung down from his horse and helped Clara dismount, then turned his attention to Samuel. "I'll get your horse settled. Sarah will take care of you. Fair warning, she'll talk your ear off given half a chance." "I will not." "Well, not much, anyway." Sarah linked her arm through Clara's with easy familiarity. "Come on, you can tell me all about Philadelphia. I've never been further east than St. Louis." Clara let herself be led into the house, too tired to resist the current of Sarah's enthusiasm. The interior was simple but well kept, whitewashed walls, solid furniture that showed the marks of handcrafting, windows positioned to catch the breeze. It felt lived in, loved, safe. "Sit," Sarah commanded, pointing to a chair at the kitchen table. "I'll get the water going. Are you hungry?" "Of course you are. Everyone's always hungry after traveling. I made stew yesterday and there's plenty left." "And I baked bread this morning. Caleb says I bake too much, but I say you can never have too much bread." She moved around the kitchen with practiced efficiency, stoking the stove, filling kettles, pulling out plates and utensils. Clara watched in a kind of daze, the warmth of the house and the simple domesticity of the scene making her throat tight with emotions she couldn't quite name. "How long have you been traveling alone?" Sarah asked, setting a bowl of stew in front of Clara, along with a thick slice of bread still faintly warm. 4 months, since Kansas." 4 months? Sarah's eyes widened. "That's incredible and terrifying. How did you manage?" "Carefully. I joined wagon trains when I could, hired guides when I couldn't, avoided trouble when possible." Clara broke off a piece of bread and found herself suddenly ravenous. "I learned to shoot. I learned which plants were edible and which water sources were safe. I learned to be invisible when necessary." "And now you're heading to Redstone Valley." The shift in Sarah's tone was subtle but noticeable. Clara looked up from her stew. "Your brother told you about that?" "Margaret Hartley told me. She tells everyone everything. It's how news spreads out here." Sarah sat down across from Clara, her expression thoughtful. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why are you really going there? And please don't say it's to honor your husband's dream or fulfill the claim or any of those noble-sounding reasons. What's the truth?" Clara set down her spoon, surprised by the directness of the question. In Philadelphia, such bluntness would have been scandalous. Out here, it felt refreshingly honest. "I don't know what else to do," she admitted. "I can't go back. I've burned those bridges thoroughly. The only path forward is the one Samuel and I planned together, even if I have to walk it alone now." "But what if there's another path, one you haven't considered?" "Like what?" Sarah leaned forward, her eyes bright with something between hope and calculation. "The settlement needs a teacher, desperately. There are 11 children within riding distance of Dry Creek Crossing, and not one of them can read beyond basic primer level. Margaret's been teaching them when she can, but she has the store to run. We've been trying to recruit someone for over a year, but no one wants to come to the middle of nowhere for teachers' wages." Clara blinked, caught off guard. I'm not a teacher. But you can read and write, and you're from Philadelphia. You must have had an education. I did, but then you're qualified, more than qualified. These children aren't looking for university lectures. They just need someone to teach them letters and numbers, history and geography. Basic skills that'll help them survive and maybe thrive in this world. Sarah reached across the table, her hand stopping just short of touching Clara's. You could stay here. Build a life that's actually yours, not one you inherited from someone else's dream. The words struck with unexpected force, like a key turning in a lock Clara hadn't known existed. For 4 months she'd been moving toward Redstone Valley like it was inevitable, the only possible destination. But what if it wasn't? What if the tragedy that had derailed her life had also freed her to choose a different track entirely? I'd have to think about it, Clara said slowly, and I'd have to see Redstone Valley first. I need to know what I'd be giving up. That's fair, but promise me you'll actually consider it? Not just dismiss it as impossible? I promise. Sarah's smile was brilliant. Good. Now finish your stew before it gets cold, and then I'll show you where you can wash up. We can talk more after you've rested. Later, after Clara had washed away the worst of the trail dust and changed into her one clean dress, she stood on the porch watching the sun sink toward the horizon. The sky was painting itself in shades of orange and purple that no Philadelphia sunset could match. Out here, even the light felt larger, more dramatic, uncontained by buildings or trees. Caleb emerged from the barn and walked over to join her, his own face and hands freshly washed. Your horse is settled, fed and watered. He'll be sore tomorrow, but he should recover fine with a few days' rest. Thank you for everything. Sarah make her teaching pitch yet? Clara glanced at him in surprise. You knew she would? The minute I told her your name. She's been obsessed with getting a teacher for the settlement. Sees it as the key to making Dry Creek Crossing a real town instead of just a waypoint. He leaned against the porch railing, his eyes on the same sunset Clara had been admiring. She's not wrong either. Education changes things, gives people options, hope. You sound like you approve. I do, but it's not my decision to make, it's yours. He turned to look at her directly. Tomorrow, I'll take you to Redstone Valley like I promised. You can see the land, meet whoever's still there, make up your own mind about whether that's the life you want. But I'll also tell you what Sarah's too polite to say. Which is? That land will break you, not might, will. You'll spend every day fighting soil that doesn't want to grow anything, water that disappears when you need it most, weather that swings from freezing to blistering without warning. You'll be 40 miles from the nearest human being who gives a damn whether you live or die. And at the end of all that struggle, if you even survive it, you'll have what? 160 acres of hardscrabble property and the hollow satisfaction of proving you could suffer through something that should never have been attempted in the first place. The harshness of his words was undercut by the gentleness of his delivery. He wasn't trying to hurt her. He was trying to save her. And if I stay here, Clara asked, teach these children I've never met in a settlement that's barely surviving itself? Then you'll still struggle, still face uncertainty. But you won't face it alone. That's the difference out here. Community isn't a luxury, it's survival. People look out for each other because that's the only way anyone makes it. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. You came west following someone else's dream, and that dream died with him. Sarah's offering you a chance to build your own dream instead. Seems worth considering. Everyone's very invested in what I should do with my life. Everyone's trying to keep you from making a mistake that'll get you killed. Or worse. There's a difference. Clara wanted to be angry at the presumption, but she couldn't quite manage it. Because everything Caleb said aligned with the doubts she'd been harboring since Kansas, the question she'd been too afraid to voice even to herself. Had she been moving toward Redstone Valley because she wanted to, or because turning away felt like admitting defeat? I'll look at the land tomorrow, she said finally. Then I'll decide. Fair enough, Caleb pushed off the railing. Sarah's making supper. You're welcome to join us, or if you'd rather rest, I can have her bring something to your room. I'll join you. It's been a long time since I ate at a real table with real people. Supper was simple but abundant. Fried potatoes, beans, more of that excellent bread, and coffee strong enough to strip paint. Sarah kept up a steady stream of conversation, asking questions about Philadelphia, sharing stories about the settlement, painting a picture of Dry Creek Crossing that was equal parts struggle and stubbornness. "The first winter nearly killed us all," she said, passing the potatoes. "We weren't prepared for how cold it got, how fast the storms came. 3 families gave up and headed back to Texas. But the ones who stayed, we learned. We helped each other. Now we know how to read the sky, how to store enough food, how to keep the livestock alive through the worst of it." "How long have you been here?" Clara asked. 4 years. Caleb and I came out from Missouri after our father died. He left us a little money, enough to buy this land and some starter stock. It's been hard, but it's ours. That matters more than you might think." After supper, Clara excused herself to the small room Sarah had prepared for her. It was barely larger than a closet, with a narrow bed and a single window, but the sheets were clean and the mattress was actual straw instead of hard ground. Luxury. She lay awake for a long time, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch. Horses moving in the corral, the distant yip of coyotes, wind sighing through the eaves. Philadelphia had been all human noise, carriages, voices, the constant rumble of city life. This was different, quieter in some ways, but more alive in others. Through the thin walls she could hear Sarah and Caleb talking in low voices. "You think she'll stay?" Sarah asked. "Don't know. She's got that same stubborn streak Ma had. Could go either way." "I hope she stays. We need her, and I think maybe she needs us even if she doesn't know it yet." "Don't get your hopes up too high. She's got her own mind, and she's got reasons for her choices we can't see." "I know, but I can still hope." Clara pulled the thin blanket up to her chin and stared at the ceiling. In the morning, she would ride to Redstone Valley. She would see the land Samuel had believed in, the future he'd imagined for them both. And then she would make a choice. Not the choice everyone expected, not the choice that honored the past, but the choice that would define who she became next. For the first time in 4 months, that felt like a real possibility instead of an impossible burden. Sleep came slowly, but when it came, it was deep and dreamless, the sleep of someone finally, temporarily safe. Dawn came early and bright, light streaming through the small window with aggressive cheerfulness. Clara woke to the smell of coffee and bacon, her stomach immediately reminding her that one good meal didn't make up for weeks of trail rations. She dressed quickly in her most practical clothing, a split riding skirt Sarah had loaned her, a sturdy cotton blouse, and boots that had been resoled so many times they were more repair than original. When she emerged into the kitchen, she found Sarah already preparing breakfast while Caleb stood by the stove, nursing a cup of coffee that was probably strong enough to dissolve spoons. "Morning," Sarah said brightly. "Sleep well?" "Better than I have in months," Clara admitted. "Good. Sit. Eat. You'll need your strength." Sarah slid a plate of eggs and bacon in front of her, along with 2 thick slices of toasted bread. "Caleb says the ride to Redstone Valley and back will take most of the day." "That's the plan," Caleb confirmed. "We'll leave within the hour. I've packed supplies and saddled fresh horses. Your Samuel is staying here to rest. You'll ride one of mine." Clara nodded, too focused on the breakfast to argue. The eggs were perfect, the bacon crispy, the bread still warm. Simple food, but after so long on the trail, it tasted like a feast. They set out as promised, riding south and east into country that grew progressively harsher. The vegetation thinned, the soil turned from brown to red-tinged hardpan, and the heat climbed with the sun until the air shimmered and danced. "It gets worse from here," Caleb said after they'd been riding for 2 hours. "The valley itself is another 3 hours ahead. You sure you want to see it?" "I'm sure." He nodded, and they continued in silence, broken only by the creak of leather and the steady rhythm of hoofbeats. Clara used the time to study the landscape, trying to see it through Samuel's eyes. What had he seen in the surveyor's description that made this seem like a promised land? What hope had he carried that she couldn't quite grasp? They crested a rise just after noon, and Caleb pointed to a shallow depression in the distance. "There. That's Redstone Valley." Clara's heart sank. Even from this distance, she could see the truth Margaret Hartley had tried to tell her. The valley was barely a dip in the terrain, offering no real shelter from wind or weather. The soil was the color of old rust, cracked and dry. A thin line of struggling cottonwoods marked where a creek must run, at least sometimes, but the trees looked more dead than alive. And the settlement, if you could call it that, consisted of 3 structures, not 6 families. 3 buildings total, and 2 of them looked abandoned. "Come on," Caleb said quietly. "You should meet whoever's left." They rode down into the valley, and Clara felt each step taking her further from hope and closer to a truth she'd been avoiding. One of the buildings was clearly a house, a soddy half dug into the hillside with a rickety porch and a stovepipe poking through the roof. The other occupied building looked like a barn or storage shed. The 2 abandoned structures were collapsing in on themselves, their owners having given up and moved on. A man emerged from the soddy as they approached, rail thin, with the kind of gauntness that spoke of hard living and harder choices. His face was burned dark by the sun, and his eyes held the flat wariness of someone who'd been disappointed too many times to hope for much. "Help you folks?" he called out, his hand resting near a rifle leaning against the doorframe. "Name's Caleb Ridge, from Dry Creek Crossing. This is Mrs. Clara Whitmore. She holds the claim on the parcel east of here, the 160 Samuel Whitmore filed before he died." The man's expression shifted slightly, recognition and something like pity flickering across his features. "Ah, yeah. We heard someone might be coming to prove that claim. Name's Tom Brennan. I'm the only one left trying to make a go of it here." "Only one?" Clara asked, her voice sounding hollow even to her own ears. "I thought there were 6 families." "There were. Last year. The Johnsons pulled out in January after their well went dry. The Mitchells left in March. Wife couldn't take the isolation, had some kind of breakdown. The Sullivans lasted until May, but then their crop failed and they decided to cut their losses. The Pratts made it through summer, but when their youngest got sick and they couldn't get to a doctor in time. He trailed off, the ending obvious and tragic. The Andersons were the last to go, just about a month ago. Said they were heading back to Missouri where land remembers how to grow things. "And you stayed," Caleb observed. "I'm stubborn. Or stupid. Sometimes hard to tell the difference." Tom gestured at the soddy. "I've got a well that produces barely, and enough supplies to get through winter if I'm careful. I raise a few chickens, trap some, trade hides when I can get to town. It's not a good life, but it's mine." Clara dismounted slowly, looking around at the barren landscape, the failed dreams made manifest in collapsed buildings and empty claims. "The land. Is it as bad as it looks?" Tom laughed, a bitter sound with no humor in it. "Ma'am, it's worse. The soil's got too much alkali. What water there is comes and goes with no pattern. The creek runs strong in spring, barely trickles in summer, sometimes freezes solid in winter. You can't rely on it. And the wind, when it gets going, it'll strip paint off wood and hope off your soul. But you're surviving. Surviving ain't the same as living, and I'm one person with low expectations and no dependents. You, from what I hear, are a widow with no frontier experience planning to prove up a claim alone." He shook his head. "I'll be blunt, Mrs. Whitmore. If you try to make a go of it out here by yourself, you'll either die or go crazy. Maybe both. And that's not pessimism talking, that's reality." Clara walked slowly toward the creek, or what passed for one. The water was sluggish and cloudy, barely covering the rocks in the stream bed. The cottonwoods cast thin, inadequate shade. This was the reliable water source the survey had mentioned. This was the foundation of Samuel's dream. She pulled the map from her saddlebag and unfolded it, comparing the careful annotations to the brutal reality. On paper it had looked so promising. 160 acres, creek access, arable land, room to build, to grow, to thrive. But maps lied. Or rather, they told truth without context, which was its own form of deception. "Mrs. Whitmore?" Caleb's voice was gentle behind her. "You've seen it now. That enough?" Clara stood at the edge of the dying creek, holding the map her dead husband had believed in, and felt something inside her finally break. Not violently, but quietly, like ice cracking under its own weight. "It was never real," she said softly. "The dream, the future. It was built on hope and incomplete information, and the desperate need to believe somewhere out there life could be better." "That doesn't make it worthless," Caleb said. "Hope got you this far, got you through things that would have broken most people. But sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let go of the wrong dream to make room for the right one. She turned to face him, this rancher who'd saved her life with water and truth in equal measure. Sarah wants me to stay in Dry Creek Crossing, teach the children. I know. What do you want? The question seemed to surprise him. He considered it carefully, his creek-stone eyes studying her face. I want you to choose what's best for you, not what you think you owe the past. I want you to build a life instead of just surviving one. And if I'm being honest, he paused, then continued with quiet conviction. I want you to know that starting over isn't the same as giving up. Sometimes it's the only thing that makes sense. Clara looked back at the valley one last time, memorizing it, not as it could have been, but as it actually was. A hard place for hard people, and she'd been hard enough for long enough. Maybe it was time to choose something different. She walked back to Tom Brennan, who was leaning against his soddy, watching the scene with the detachment of a man who'd seen this particular tragedy play out before. Mr. Brennan, the claim is yours if you want it. I'll sign whatever papers are necessary to transfer it legally. His eyebrows rose. Just like that? Just like that. You've earned this land through sheer stubbornness. That counts for more than paperwork in my book. That's generous, Mrs. Whitmore. I appreciate it. No need to appreciate it. I'm just acknowledging reality. She folded the map carefully and handed it to him. This might help with the boundaries if you decide to file properly. Tom took the map, handling it like it was precious, which Clara supposed out here it was. What will you do? I'm going to teach school in Dry Creek Crossing, help some children learn to read and write, and maybe dream of better things. That's good work. Better than dying alone in a valley that doesn't want you. He extended a hand and Clara shook it. His grip was firm, his palm calloused, a working man's hand that knew the truth of things. Good luck to you, ma'am, truly. And to you, Mr. Brennan. They mounted up and rode back the way they'd come, the sun now past its zenith and heading toward afternoon. Clara felt lighter somehow, as if leaving the claim behind had shed a physical weight from her shoulders. That was a good thing you did, Caleb said after they'd been riding for an hour. It was the only thing that made sense. That land belongs to someone willing to fight for it. I'm not that person. What kind of person are you? Clara thought about it, watching the landscape gradually soften as they left Redstone Valley behind. I don't know yet, but I think I'm ready to find out. They rode through Dry Creek Crossing as the sun painted long shadows across the dusty street. Margaret Hartley was sitting on her store's porch, shelling peas into a bowl, and she stood up when she saw them approaching. Back already? She called. I expected you'd be gone until sundown. Didn't take as long as we thought, Caleb replied, reining up. Mrs. Whitmore's seen Redstone Valley. And? Clara dismounted and tied her horse to the rail. And I'd like to discuss the teaching position, if it's still available. Margaret's face broke into a smile that transformed her weathered features into something almost young. Available? Lord, yes. Come inside. Let's talk terms. The store's interior was dim and cluttered with everything a frontier settlement might need. Sacks of flour and beans, bolts of cloth, tools, ammunition, medicines, dry goods, and 1,000 other items packed onto shelves and hanging from rafters. Margaret led Clara to a small table near the back where she presumably conducted business and bade her sit. Now then, Margaret said, pulling out a ledger and flipping to a marked page. The position pays $20 a month, room and board included. There's a cabin at the edge of town that's been sitting empty. You can have it. The settlement will provide firewood and basic supplies. Teaching schedule is 5 days a week, 9 months of the year. Summer's off because that's when the older children are needed for farm work. We've got 11 students ranging from age 6 to 14, all at different levels. Some can barely recognize letters. A few can read simple texts. None have had formal education. What about curriculum? Books? We've got some primers and readers donated from families back east. Not many, but enough to start. You'll have to be creative, teach reading and writing, basic arithmetic, geography if you can, some history. The goal is practical education that'll serve them whether they stay here or move on someday. And the community's expectations? That you'll show up, do your best, and treat the children fairly. That's all. We're not looking for perfection, Mrs. Whitmore. We're looking for possibility. Margaret leaned back in her chair. I'll be honest with you, this won't be easy. Some of the families are scattered miles apart, which means children riding long distances in all weather. You'll have students who resent being there, parents who think education is less important than chores, and resources so limited you'll have to stretch your imagination daily. But you'll also have children hungry to learn, families grateful for the opportunity, and a community that'll support you however we can. Clara listened to the litany of challenges and found herself nodding. This felt real in a way the Redstone Valley claim never had. Difficult? Yes. Uncertain? Absolutely. But real. When can I start? She asked. How about Monday? That gives you 3 days to settle into the cabin, review what materials we have, and prepare yourself mentally. Margaret extended her hand across the table. Welcome to Dry Creek Crossing, Teacher Whitmore. They shook on it, and Clara felt something click into place. Not destiny, not fate, but choice. Her choice. Her future. For the first time since Samuel's death, she wasn't following someone else's plan or honoring someone else's dream. She was building her own. When she emerged from the store, she found Caleb still waiting, though he'd moved into the shade and was whittling a piece of wood with the patient focus of a man comfortable with silence. All settled? He asked, looking up. All settled. I start Monday. Then I reckon you'll need help moving your things into the teacher's cabin. It's been empty a while, probably needs cleaning and airing out. I appreciate the help, but I don't want to impose. Clara. He said her name like it was obvious, like she should know better. Out here, we don't view help as imposition. We view it as survival. You're part of this community now, which means what needs doing, we do together. Understand? She smiled despite herself. I'm learning. Good. That's a start. They spent the rest of the afternoon preparing the cabin, a small structure of adobe and timber with one main room, a sleeping alcove, and a stone fireplace. Sarah arrived with cleaning supplies and an infectious enthusiasm, scrubbing walls while Caleb repaired loose floorboards and Clara swept out accumulated dust and debris. It's perfect, Sarah declared when they finished, surveying the transformed space. Small, but perfect. You'll need furniture, a bed, a table, chairs. I think we can cobble together enough from spare pieces folks have sitting around. I can pay. Didn't I hear my brother explain how things work? We help each other. You'll repay it by teaching our children. That's the transaction. By the time the sun set, Clara had a clean home, a job, and something that felt almost like hope stirring in her chest. Tentative, fragile, but growing stronger with each passing hour. That night, back at the ranch for one last evening, she sat on the porch with Caleb and Sarah, watching stars emerge in a sky so clear and vast, it made her feel simultaneously insignificant and infinite. Thank you, she said quietly. Both of you. For everything. You're welcome, Sarah replied, but we should be thanking you. You're giving this settlement something it desperately needs. I'm giving myself something I desperately need, Clara corrected. Purpose, community, a reason to wake up that isn't just obligation to the past. Caleb, who'd been quiet most of the evening, finally spoke. Your husband would be proud of you, I think, not for honoring his dream, but for having the courage to build your own. Clara felt tears prick her eyes, but didn't try to hide them. I hope so. I hope wherever he is, he understands. If he loved you, he understands. And if he didn't love you enough to want your happiness over his dream, Caleb shrugged. Well, then his opinion doesn't matter much anyway. It was, Clara reflected, perhaps the kindest and most freeing thing anyone had said to her in the 4 months since Samuel's death. Sunday passed in a blur of preparation. More furniture appeared. A bed frame donated by a family whose children had grown, a table built by the blacksmith from salvaged lumber, chairs of mismatched origin but solid construction. Margaret delivered a crate of books and materials, along with a slate and chalk for lessons. The Hendersons are bringing their 3 children tomorrow, she said, helping Clara organize the small classroom she'd set up in the cabin's main room. They're the closest, only about 2 miles out. The Johansson girl will ride in with her father when he comes for supplies. The others will trickle in as word spreads that school's actually starting. And if they don't come, they will, trust me. Parents out here understand that education is the difference between their children having options and having none. They'll come. Monday morning dawned cool and clear. Clara woke before sunrise, nerves and excitement warring in her stomach. She dressed carefully in her most practical but professional clothing, braided her hair into submission, and tried to remember everything she'd learned from her own teachers in Philadelphia. The first students arrived just after 8, 3 children ranging from about 7 to 12, accompanied by their mother, a worn-looking woman in a faded dress who introduced herself as Mrs. Henderson. "Thank you for doing this," she said earnestly. "My husband and I, we never had much schooling ourselves, but we want better for them." "I'll do my best," Clara promised, meaning it with every fiber of her being. By 9 o'clock, 7 children had assembled in her small classroom, perched on chairs and benches, eyeing her with expressions ranging from curiosity to suspicion to outright hope. Clara stood before them, this collection of frontier children who represented her new purpose, and took a deep breath. "Good morning. My name is Mrs. Whitmore, and I'll be your teacher. I know some of you have had a little schooling and some haven't had any. That's perfectly fine. We'll all start where we are and move forward together. The first thing I want to know is your names and one thing you hope to learn this year." They went around the circle, shy at first, then gradually warming. Tom Henderson, age 12, wanted to learn enough mathematics to help with ranch accounts. His sister Mary, 9, wanted to read stories. Little Samuel, Clara's heart clenched at the name, wanted to know why the sky was blue. Each child revealed a small piece of themselves, and Clara felt the weight of responsibility settle onto her shoulders like a mantle. This was real. This mattered. These children needed her, and for the first time in months, Clara felt truly needed for something she could actually do. The first day was chaotic, finding the right level for each student, establishing rules and routines, managing different ages and abilities in one small space. But when the last child left at 3 o'clock, Clara sat down at her table, exhausted and exhilarated in equal measure. She'd done it. She'd started. The weeks that followed fell into a pattern. Early mornings preparing lessons, days teaching reading and writing and arithmetic, evenings grading work and planning ahead. More students appeared as word spread, until she had 13 children ranging from age 6 to 15, each bringing their own challenges and triumphs. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, Dry Creek Crossing began to change around her. Families who'd been considering leaving decided to stay for the school. New arrivals, hearing the settlement had a teacher, chose to build there instead of pushing further into uncertain territory. The general store started stocking more books and slates. Someone organized a community dance to raise funds for school supplies. Clara found herself woven into the fabric of the town in ways she never had been in Philadelphia. People stopped to chat when she walked to the store. Families invited her for Sunday dinners. The children's progress became a source of communal pride. And through it all, Caleb was there. Not hovering, not intrusive, but present. He'd stop by the cabin to fix a loose shutter or bring firewood. He'd linger after delivering supplies, sharing coffee and conversation on the porch. They talked about books and weather, philosophy and practical matters, dreams and disappointments. One evening in late October, as autumn painted the landscape in shades of gold and amber, Caleb appeared at her door with a proposal that had nothing to do with marriage, but everything to do with the future. "The settlement's growing," he said without preamble. "We need a proper schoolhouse, something bigger than your cabin, something that can hold 20 or 30 students if needed. I've talked to the other ranchers and landowners. We're willing to donate materials and labor, but we need someone to oversee it, make sure it's built right for teaching." Clara stared at him, struck by the magnitude of what he was suggesting. A real schoolhouse. A real schoolhouse. With space for books and maps, windows for light, maybe even a small library eventually. What do you think? What did she think? She thought about the cramped cabin where children squeezed onto benches meant for half their number. She thought about this future, about possibility, about a settlement that was choosing education as its foundation. "I think," she said slowly, a smile spreading across her face, "I think it's the best idea I've heard in a very long time." "Then we'll start building after harvest. Should be ready by spring." He turned to leave, then paused, looking back at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You've changed this place, Clara, given it something to build toward instead of just survive for. That matters more than you probably know." "It matters to me too," she said quietly. More than I can explain." He nodded, understanding in the gesture, and walked back toward his horse tied at the fence. Clara watched him go, this man who'd saved her life by offering water and truth, who'd helped her find a purpose she didn't know she was seeking. The desert night settled over Dry Creek Crossing, and in her small cabin, Clara lit a lamp and sat down to plan the next day's lessons. Outside, the vast frontier stretched endlessly in all directions, full of danger and possibility in equal measure. But here, in this struggling settlement that was slowly becoming a home, Clara Whitmore had finally found her place, not by following someone else's dream, but by having the courage to build her own. And the story was just beginning. Winter arrived with a vengeance that first week of November, sweeping down from the northern mountains like an invading army. Clara woke one morning to find frost thick on the windows and her breath visible inside the cabin despite the embers still glowing in the fireplace. She dressed quickly, layering every piece of warm clothing she owned, and stepped outside to a world transformed by ice. The school day that followed tested everything she'd learned about frontier resilience. Only 5 children made it through the cold, the ones who lived closest, and even they arrived shivering despite their heavy coats and wool scarves. Clara kept the fire blazing, moved the lessons closer to the hearth, and taught geography while they all huddled together for warmth. Mrs. Whitmore, little Emma Johansson, raised her hand, her nose red from the cold. "My papa says this is just the beginning. He says by January we might not be able to come at all for weeks." Clara had been dreading this reality. She'd known intellectually that winter would interrupt school, but hearing it stated so plainly by a 7-year-old made it concrete and painful. "Then we'll make the most of every day we have," she said firmly. "And when the weather's too bad for travel, I want you all to practice your reading at home. Every single day, even if it's just 1 page. Promise me." They promised, their young voices solemn with the weight of the commitment. Clara looked at their faces, these children who rode miles through bitter cold because they hungered for knowledge, and felt her throat tighten with emotion she didn't dare show. When the last student left that afternoon, Clara stood in the doorway watching them disappear into the gray twilight, small figures on horseback swallowed by the vast emptiness. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of more snow coming, and she shivered despite her shawl. "You'll freeze standing there like that." She turned to find Caleb leading his horse up to the fence, saddlebags heavy with what looked like supplies. He'd taken to stopping by every few days, always with some practical excuse. Firewood needed splitting, a loose board required attention. He happened to be passing through on his way somewhere else. Clara had stopped questioning the coincidences and simply accepted them as part of the rhythm of her new life. "I was just thinking about winter," she said, stepping back to let him inside. "How it's going to make everything harder." "Everything's harder in winter. That's why we prepare." He set the saddlebags on her table and began unpacking. Smoked meat, dried beans, coffee, sugar, a jar of Sarah's preserves, and a thick wool blanket she recognized from the ranch. "Sarah sent these. Said you'll need them when the real cold sets in. I can't keep accepting charity. It's not charity, it's survival." He fixed her with that steady creekstone gaze that had become familiar over the past months. "Clara, you're part of this community now. That means when someone has extra, they share. When you have extra, you'll share. It's how we all make it through." She wanted to argue, but the logic was irrefutable and the supplies were desperately needed. "Thank you. Tell Sarah I'm grateful. Tell her yourself at Sunday supper. She's expecting you." Claire had been joining the Ridge family for Sunday meals with increasing frequency, drawn by Sarah's warm hospitality and the simple pleasure of conversation that ranged beyond primer lessons and frontier practicalities. She'd found herself looking forward to those evenings with an anticipation that had nothing to do with the excellent food and everything to do with the company. "I'll be there," she promised. Caleb moved to the fireplace and began building up the fire with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd spent a lifetime managing the elements. Clara watched his hands, scarred and calloused, capable hands that knew how to coax life from reluctant flames. "The schoolhouse," he said without looking up from his work. "We're going to start construction next week while the weather holds. I wanted to show you the plans, make sure they match what you need." He pulled a rolled parchment from his coat and spread it on the table. Clara leaned over to study the drawings, surprisingly detailed sketches showing a single-room building with large windows on the south and east sides, A stone fireplace at one end, built-in shelves for books, and space enough for at least 30 students. Caleb, this is... She traced the lines with her finger, seeing her classroom transformed from cramped quarters to genuine possibility. This is wonderful, but it must cost a fortune in materials and labor. It's an investment. The ranchers who are donating materials see it that way. Better schools mean their children have options beyond ranching, means the settlement attracts more families, which means more customers, more trade, more stability. He pointed to the window placements. I figured you'd want maximum light for reading, and the shelves here can hold books, slates, maps, whatever you accumulate over time. You've thought of everything. I've tried, but you're the teacher. If something doesn't work, speak up now while we can still change it. Clara studied the plans more carefully, her mind already furnishing the empty space with students and lessons and the hum of learning. Could we add a small storage room here for supplies, winter coats, things that need to be kept dry? Good thinking. I'll sketch it in. He pulled a pencil from his pocket and made quick notations on the plans. Anything else? A covered porch, maybe? Somewhere children can wait if they arrive early, out of the weather. Smart. We'll extend the roofline here. More marks on the parchment. What about a bell tower? Something to call students to class? The image formed in Clara's mind. A schoolhouse with a bell that would ring across the valley, calling children to learning, marking the hours, becoming the heartbeat of a growing community. It was almost too perfect, too hopeful. Yes, she said softly. A bell tower would be perfect. Caleb looked up from the plans and their eyes met across the table. Something unspoken passed between them in that moment, an understanding that went beyond practical discussions of windows and storage rooms. They were building more than a schoolhouse. They were building a future that neither of them had planned, but both were choosing, day by day, conversation by conversation. I'll talk to the blacksmith about casting a bell, Caleb said, his voice rougher than usual. Might take a few months, but we'll have it ready by the time school resumes in spring. Spring feels very far away right now. It does, but it'll come. It always does. He rolled up the plans carefully. In the meantime, you focus on teaching whoever can get through. Let the community worry about building. That's how this works. After he left, Clara sat by the fire and let herself imagine the schoolhouse complete. Children filling the benches, sunlight streaming through those carefully placed windows, the bell ringing to mark the beginning of another day of possibility. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to think beyond mere survival to something that looked almost like contentment. The next week brought the first real snow, 3 inches that transformed Dry Creek Crossing into a hushed white world. Construction on the schoolhouse began despite the cold, with men from surrounding ranches showing up to dig the foundation and lay the first courses of stone. Clara watched from her cabin window between lessons, marveling at how quickly the structure took shape. Margaret Hartley stopped by one afternoon with hot coffee and sharp observations. They're working fast, she noted, nodding toward the construction site where a dozen men swarmed over the emerging building. Caleb's driving them hard, wants to get it weather-tight before the real winter hits. I'm grateful for everyone's effort. Grateful enough to notice how often Caleb Ridge finds reasons to be in town these days? Margaret's eyes glinted with knowing amusement. Man who used to come through once a month is suddenly here 3 times a week. Can't imagine what the attraction might be. Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. He's overseeing the construction. He's overseeing something, that's for certain. Margaret took a sip of her coffee, completely unrepentant about her meddling. Don't look so scandalized. Out here, we don't waste time with elaborate courtship rituals. Life's too short and the winters are too long. If 2 people suit each other, the sensible thing is to acknowledge it and move forward. Mrs. Hartley, I've only been here 2 months. And in those 2 months, you've proven yourself capable, committed, and compatible with our most eligible bachelor. That's more than most marriages start with. She set down her cup and fixed Clara with a serious look. I'm not saying you need to rush into anything. I'm saying don't dismiss something good because some arbitrary timeline says it's too soon. Out here, we measure time in seasons and survival, not social conventions. Clara wanted to protest, but the truth was Margaret had identified something Clara had been carefully not examining too closely, the way her heart lifted when she saw Caleb approaching. The way conversations with him felt effortless, ranging from practical matters to philosophy without awkward transitions, the way she'd started measuring her weeks by Sunday suppers at the ranch. "I'm not ready," she said finally. "I was married. I loved my husband. I can't just what? Feel something for someone new? Clara, your husband died. That's a tragedy, but it doesn't mean your heart died with him." Margaret's voice softened. "I was married once, too. Lost him to pneumonia 12 years back. I know what you're feeling, that guilt that comes with moving forward, like somehow caring for someone new diminishes what came before. But it doesn't. Love isn't finite. It doesn't run out." The words settled into Clara's chest, finding spaces she hadn't known were waiting to be filled. She'd been so focused on not betraying Samuel's memory that she hadn't considered she might be betraying herself instead. "I don't know how," she admitted. "How to do this. How to be open to something new when the old loss still feels so present. You just do. One day at a time, one conversation at a time, and you stop punishing yourself for being alive and wanting things." Margaret stood, brushing snow from her skirt. "Now, I've meddled enough for one day, but think about what I said, and maybe pay attention to how that man looks at you when he thinks no one's watching." After Margaret left, Clara stood at the window watching the schoolhouse take shape and tried to see Caleb through clearer eyes. Was Margaret right? Had something been growing between them that Clara had been deliberately ignoring? Sunday supper that week felt different, charged with new awareness. Clara found herself noticing small things, the way Caleb held her chair, the careful way he passed her dishes, the way his eyes sought hers across the table during conversation. And she noticed Sarah watching them both with barely concealed satisfaction. After the meal, while Sarah cleaned up despite Clara's offers to help, Caleb suggested a walk. The evening was cold but clear, the sky already showing early stars, and Clara wrapped herself in her warmest shawl before joining him on the porch. They walked in silence toward the corral, their breath making white clouds in the frigid air. The horses shuffled and snorted softly, dark shapes in the gathering dusk. "Sarah's being obvious," Caleb said finally, amusement threading through his voice. "She thinks she's subtle, but she's about as subtle as a buffalo stampede." Clara laughed despite her nervousness. "Margaret's no better. She stopped by this week specifically to tell me I should pay attention to how you look at me." "And are you? Paying attention?" The question hung in the cold air between them, weighted with possibility and risk. Clara could deflect, could retreat into the safety of her carefully maintained boundaries. Or she could be honest. "I'm trying not to," she admitted, "because it feels too soon, too fast, too much like I'm forgetting where I came from." Caleb leaned against the corral fence, his profile silhouetted against the darkening sky. "You want to know what I think?" "I'm not sure, but tell me anyway." "I think you're so busy honoring your past that you're afraid to claim your future. I think you believe you owe your dead husband perpetual mourning when what you really owe him is living the best life you can." He turned to face her fully. "And I think you feel something for me, same as I feel something for you. But you've convinced yourself it's a betrayal when really it's just being human." The words cut through every careful rationalization Clara had constructed. "You feel something for me?" "Of course I do. You're smart, brave, stubborn as hell, and you've got this way of seeing possibilities where other people only see problems. You took a failing settlement and gave it hope. You looked at my half-formed schoolhouse plans and made them better. You argue with me about books and philosophy, and don't back down even when you know I'm right." He smiled slightly. "How could I not feel something?" Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. "Caleb, I'm not asking you for anything," he continued. "I'm not demanding you feel the same or make any decisions tonight. I'm just being honest because I think you deserve honesty more than you deserve protection from uncomfortable truths." He reached out slowly, giving her time to step back if she wanted, and took her hand. His palm was warm against her frozen fingers. "But I will say this. You're allowed to want things for yourself. You're allowed to build a life that's yours, not just a monument to someone else's dreams. And if part of that life includes me, well, I'd consider that a privilege worth earning." Clara looked down at their joined hands, feeling the warmth radiating up her arm and into her chest where something frozen had been slowly, carefully thawing for weeks now. "I'm scared," she whispered. "I know." What if I'm not ready? What if it's too soon and I mess everything up? Then we'll figure it out together. That's what partnerships are. Two people figuring things out together instead of alone. She looked up at him, this man who'd appeared through the heat haze when she'd been on the edge of giving up, who'd offered water and truth and steady presence ever since. Margaret was right. Sarah was right. Hell, even she was right when she was honest with herself. Something had been growing between them, roots finding purchase in the rocky soil of new beginnings. I can't promise I'm ready for anything serious, she said carefully. I can't promise I won't be difficult or uncertain or conflicted. I wouldn't believe you if you did promise those things. I'm just asking if you're willing to see where this goes. No expectations, no pressure, just possibility. Possibility. The same word she'd used to describe what education could bring to the settlement. The same quality she'd been trying to offer her students while denying it to herself. Yes, she said, the word barely more than breath in the cold air. I'm willing to see where this goes. Caleb's smile was like sunrise, slow and warming. He squeezed her hand gently, then released it. Good. That's all I needed to hear. They walked back to the house in comfortable silence. Something settled between them even as new questions bloomed. Sarah took one look at their faces and grinned triumphantly, but she had the grace not to comment directly. December arrived with storms that buried Dry Creek Crossing under 2 feet of snow. School became sporadic, with Clara teaching whoever could get through between blizzards and using the empty days to organize supplies and plan spring curriculum. The schoolhouse construction halted, the half-finished building standing like a promise frozen in time. Clara spent Christmas Day at the ranch, joining Sarah and Caleb for a meal that was simple but joyful. They'd strung dried berries and pine cones for decoration, and Sarah had baked enough to feed 20 people despite there being only 3 of them. It's our first Christmas with family in years, Sarah explained when Clara protested the abundance. Pa died 4 years ago, and it's been just Caleb and me since. Having you here makes it feel like we're building something new instead of just surviving the memory of what we lost. Clara understood that sentiment perfectly. She'd spent last Christmas alone in a boarding house in Kansas, too fresh in her grief to feel anything but numb. This year, surrounded by warmth and laughter and the easy affection of people who'd become family through choice rather than blood, she felt something crack open inside her. Not painful, but like the first break in winter ice that heralds spring. Caleb gave her a book for Christmas, a volume of Whitman poetry that must have cost him considerably. She gave him a scarf she'd knitted during the long evenings alone, the stitches imperfect but serviceable. They exchanged gifts with a shyness that made Sarah laugh affectionately. You two are ridiculous, she declared. Just kiss already and stop dancing around each other like nervous colts. Sarah! Caleb's scandalized tone only made his sister laugh harder. But later, when Sarah had gone to check on the animals and Clara and Caleb stood on the porch watching snow fall through darkness, he did kiss her, soft and careful, asking rather than taking. Clara kissed him back, tasting coffee and possibility, and the slow unfurling of something she'd thought died in a Kansas grave. Merry Christmas, Clara, he said when they separated, his forehead resting against hers. Merry Christmas, Caleb. January tested everyone's resolve. The cold became brutal, temperatures dropping so low that water froze in buckets within minutes of being drawn from the well. School closed entirely for 3 weeks, and Clara worried constantly about her students losing what they'd gained. She spent her days reading by the fire, writing lesson plans, and rationing her supplies with increasing care. Caleb came through whenever the weather allowed, always bringing supplies and companionship in equal measure. They'd sit by her fire and talk for hours, conversations ranging from mundane daily details to deep philosophical debates. Clara learned about his childhood in Missouri, his mother's death on the trail west, his father's slow decline after settling in the territory. Caleb learned about her privileged Philadelphia upbringing, her rebellion through marrying Samuel, her complicated relationship with a family that valued appearance over authenticity. You've always been brave, he said one afternoon after she'd confessed her doubts about leaving Philadelphia. Maybe you didn't see it that way, but choosing uncertainty over comfort takes courage most people don't have. I didn't feel brave. I felt desperate, like I was suffocating and had to break free or die. Sometimes those feel the same, but the result is what matters. You escaped. You survived. You're building something meaningful with your life now. Clara looked at him across the small table where they shared coffee and conversation. This man who saw her more clearly than anyone ever had, and felt her carefully guarded heart open a little wider. "What about you?" she asked. "Why stay here? You could sell the ranch, go somewhere easier, more civilized." "Because this is mine in a way nothing back east could ever be. Every fence post, every acre, every head of cattle, I built it with my own hands. Nobody gave it to me, nobody can take it away. That matters to me more than comfort or civilization." He paused. "Besides, who'd look after Sarah? She's tougher than most men I know, but the frontier's no place for a woman alone. She could marry. She could. But she won't, not unless she finds someone who'll accept her as a partner instead of property. She's too smart and too stubborn to settle." He smiled slightly. "Sound like anyone you know?" Clara threw a balled-up piece of paper at him, which he dodged easily while laughing. These moments, light and warm and easy, sustained her through the darkest parts of winter. When the isolation threatened to overwhelm her, when she questioned every choice that had led her to a frozen cabin in the middle of nowhere, she thought about Caleb's steady presence and Sarah's fierce friendship and the students waiting for spring to resume their learning. February brought a brief thaw, enough for construction to resume on the schoolhouse. The men worked frantically to complete the structure before the next storm hit, and by the end of the month the building stood finished, windows glazed, door hung, interior still raw but functional. Clara walked through it alone one late afternoon, her footsteps echoing in the empty space. Sunlight streamed through the large windows exactly as planned, illuminating the built-in shelves and the stone fireplace and the wide expanse of floor where students would sit. She could almost hear the sound of learning already, questions and answers, the scratch of chalk on slate, pages turning. "What do you think?" Caleb appeared in the doorway, brushing sawdust from his hands. "I think it's perfect," Clara said honestly. "Better than I imagined." "Wait until you see this." He led her to the far corner where a rope hung from the ceiling, disappearing into the loft space above. "Pull it." Clara took hold of the rope and pulled. A clear, bright bell tone rang out across the valley, strong enough to be heard for miles. The sound filled her with such sudden joy she had to blink back tears. "The bell came yesterday," Caleb explained. "Had it cast specially. Figured the schoolhouse needed a proper voice." "It's wonderful," she managed, her voice thick with emotion. "You're wonderful." He said it simply, matter-of-factly, the way he might comment on the weather. "You took a half-formed idea and made it real. This building exists because you gave us a reason to build it." Clara set down the bell rope and turned to face him fully. "I didn't do this alone." "No, you didn't. But you started it. That counts for something." They stood in the empty schoolhouse that would soon pulse with life and learning, and Clara felt the future spreading before her like the valley beyond the windows, vast and uncertain, but no longer terrifying. She'd started this journey chasing someone else's dream and found her own instead. She'd arrived broken and alone and found community and purpose and something that was beginning to feel remarkably like love. "Caleb," she said carefully, "what are we doing here?" "Building a schoolhouse," he replied, deliberately obtuse. "You know what I mean." He crossed the space between them, his boots loud on the wooden floor. "Recording, I suppose, though that's a fancy word for two people getting to know each other and seeing if they fit. We're building something together, friendship, partnership, maybe more if we're lucky and brave enough to reach for it. I'm not good at brave." "You're better at it than you think." He reached up and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, his touch gentle. "You've been brave every day since I met you. Brave enough to admit when a dream wasn't yours. Brave enough to build a new one. Brave enough to open yourself to possibility when you had every reason to stay closed. What if I mess this up? What if I'm not ready and I hurt you? Then we'll deal with it together. Clara, I'm not asking for guarantees or promises you can't make. I'm just asking you to keep being honest with me and yourself. That's all any of this requires." She studied his face in the slanting afternoon light, weathered and honest, strong without being hard, patient without being passive. This was a man who would wait for her to find her footing, who would offer support without trying to carry her, who would respect her autonomy while building something shared. "I care about you," she said, testing the words aloud for the first time. "More than I expected to. More than I thought I could. I know, I care about you too. What happens now? Now we keep doing what we've been doing. We spend time together. We talk. We build this schoolhouse and this settlement and whatever else needs building, and we see where it leads." He smiled. "The frontiers taught me patience, if nothing else. I can wait for you to catch up with what your heart already knows." "And what does my heart know?" "That you're home, that you found where you belong, and that belonging includes me, if you'll have me." The certainty in his voice should have been presumptuous, but instead it felt like permission to acknowledge what she'd been feeling, permission to move forward, permission to choose happiness without guilt. "I'll have you," she said softly. "I already do, I think. I just needed to admit it out loud." This kiss was different from the careful one at Christmas, deeper, more confident, a promise rather than a question. When they separated, both slightly breathless, Caleb grinned like a man who'd just won something valuable. "Well then," he said, "I suppose we should probably make this official at some point." Official? Courting with intention. The kind that ends in marriage, if we're both so inclined. He said it casually, but Clara could see the nervous hope in his eyes. "I'm not proposing, not yet. But I want you to know that's where I'm headed, so you can decide if you want to walk that path with me." Marriage. The word should have terrified her, coming so soon after the loss of her first husband, but instead it settled into her chest with surprising comfort, like a piece clicking into place. "I might be so inclined," she said carefully. "In time, when we're both sure." "Fair enough. I can work within time." He took her hand and they walked together toward the door. "Come on. Sarah's expecting us for supper and she'll have my hide if I make us late." They emerged from the schoolhouse into the purple twilight of early evening. Smoke rose from chimneys throughout the settlement, families gathering for meals and warmth against the lingering cold. Spring felt closer now, carried on the lengthening days and the subtle shift in the wind. March roared in with the last fierce storms of winter, but between the blizzards, signs of thaw appeared. Ice began breaking up in the creek. The first brave birds returned from wherever they'd fled. And one morning, Clara woke to the sound of water dripping from the eaves, and knew winter's grip was finally loosening. School resumed the first week of March with 13 students crowding into the new schoolhouse, their excitement palpable. The building still smelled of fresh wood and paint, and every surface gleamed with newness. Clara rang the bell for the first time to call them to class, and the sound carried across the valley like a declaration. Learning lived here, possibility thrived here. The future was being built one lesson at a time. The students adapted quickly to the new space, spreading out across benches instead of crowding together. Sunlight streamed through the windows, warm and bright. The stone fireplace kept the cold at bay without smoking. It was, Clara reflected, everything a schoolhouse should be. "Mrs. Whitmore?" Mary Henderson raised her hand during afternoon lessons. "My ma says you're going to marry Mr. Ridge. Is that true?" Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks while 13 young faces turned toward her with frank curiosity. She should have expected this. Nothing stayed private in a settlement this small. "Your mother's getting ahead of things," she said diplomatically. "Mr. Ridge and I are friends." "Friends who court," Emma Johansson piped up knowingly. "My sister says courting leads to marriage every time." "Your sister is not always correct about everything," Clara replied, though she couldn't quite suppress her smile. "Now, unless you'd all like extra arithmetic problems, I suggest we return to today's lesson on state capitals." The thread of extra arithmetic worked as always, and the students returned their attention to geography. But Clara caught several knowing looks exchanged between the older girls and knew her relationship with Caleb had become settlement gossip. That evening, she confronted him about it when he stopped by with firewood. "The entire settlement thinks we're practically engaged," she said, half amused and half exasperated. "My students spent half the afternoon asking about our wedding instead of learning geography." Caleb had the grace to look chagrined. "Sarah may have mentioned something to Margaret, who mentioned it to everyone else with functioning ears. I tried to tell her to be discreet, but discretion isn't exactly Sarah's strength. So what do we do about it?" "We could confirm it." He set down the armload of wood and turned to face her. Make it official. Give them something real to gossip about instead of speculation. Clara's heart stuttered. Caleb, I'm not proposing. Not yet. Not like this. But I am saying we should stop pretending we're just friends when we're clearly more. Let people see what's actually happening between us instead of hiding it like we're ashamed. He was right, Clara realized. They'd been careful to maintain propriety, but in doing so, they'd created a vacuum that gossip rushed to fill. Better to be honest about what they were building than let rumors build it for them. All right, she agreed. No more hiding. Recording with serious intention. Let people know that. You sure? I'm sure. And she was. The fear that had gripped her for months had finally, fully released its hold. She loved Caleb Ridge. Not the same way she'd loved Samuel, but completely and genuinely in a way that honored both her past and her future. Word spread through the settlement with the speed of wildfire. By Sunday, everyone knew that the teacher and the rancher were officially courting, and the general consensus seemed to be satisfaction. Clara had proven herself valuable to the community. Caleb was well respected and successful. It was, by frontier standards, an excellent match. April brought warmth that felt like blessing after the brutal winter. The valley transformed from brown to green almost overnight as grass pushed through thawed soil and wildflowers bloomed in impossible profusion. The creek swelled with snowmelt, running fast and clear. Life returned with vengeance, making up for months of dormancy. The schoolhouse settled into its rhythm, education becoming as fundamental to the settlement as the general store or the blacksmith. Families began planning their lives around the school calendar. New arrivals asked about the teacher before asking about available land. Children who'd been barely literate in the fall now read with growing confidence, their horizons expanding with each book they conquered. And through it all, Clara and Caleb's relationship deepened with the comfortable ease of two people who'd found their match. They spent Sundays together at the ranch, weekday evenings when Caleb came to town, stolen hours between obligations when they could simply be together without the weight of frontier survival pressing down. One evening in late April, as they sat on the schoolhouse steps watching the sun paint the valley in shades of gold and rose, Caleb pulled a small box from his pocket. I was going to wait, he said, turning the box over in his hands. Make it more formal, more proper. But every time I plan some elaborate gesture, it feels wrong. We've never been about elaborate. We've been about honest. Clara's heart began racing. Caleb. So I'm just going to ask you straight, the way I'd ask any important question. Clara Whitmore, will you marry me? Will you build a life with me here in this settlement we're both helping grow? Will you let me be your partner in all the ways that matter? Friend, lover, fellow builder of impossible things? He opened the box to reveal a simple gold band inlaid with a single small stone that caught the fading light. It's not fancy, he continued, but it's solid and it'll last, same as what I'm offering you. A solid life built on honest foundations. No grand promises or empty dreams, just two people choosing each other every day and building something worthwhile together. Clara looked at the ring, then at Caleb, then at the valley spreading before them, where they'd both found home in different ways that had somehow converged. Every careful argument about timing and propriety dissolved in the face of simple truth. She loved this man. She wanted this life. She was ready to choose it fully. Yes, she said, her voice clear and certain. Yes, I'll marry you. The smile that broke across Caleb's face was pure joy, unguarded and brilliant. He slid the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, as if it had been made for her, and kissed her with the kind of thorough attention that made her forget they were sitting in full view of anyone who might pass by. When they finally separated, both slightly dazed, Sarah came running from the direction of the general store, whooping with unladylike enthusiasm. Finally, she shouted. I thought you two would never get around to it. You were watching? Caleb demanded. Of course I was watching. Margaret and I had a wager on whether you'd propose before May. I just won $3. She grabbed Clara in a fierce hug. Welcome to the family. Officially. Clara laughed, hugging Sarah back, and felt the last pieces of her new life click into place. She'd come to this territory chasing a dead man's dream and found her own instead. She'd arrived alone and broken and found community and purpose and love. The transformation felt complete, yet somehow also just beginning. The engagement announcement rippled through Dry Creek Crossing like wind through wheat, and within days the entire settlement had thrown itself into wedding preparations with an enthusiasm that both touched and overwhelmed Clara. Margaret Hartley appointed herself unofficial coordinator, appearing at the schoolhouse during lunch with fabric samples and opinions about everything from flowers to food. "June wedding," she declared, spreading swatches of cloth across Clara's desk while students ate their lunches outside. "Gives us 2 months to prepare properly. The settlement hasn't had a real celebration in over a year. We need this." "Margaret, I don't want to impose." "You're not imposing. You're giving us an excuse to remember we're human beings capable of joy instead of just survivors grinding through existence. There's a difference." She held up a cream-colored fabric. "This would look beautiful on you. Simple, elegant, practical enough to wear again for special occasions." And Clara touched the fabric, surprisingly fine for frontier goods. "Where did this come from?" "Had it shipped from Denver last year for a customer who never claimed it. Been sitting in my storeroom ever since." Margaret's eyes softened. "Consider it my wedding gift. Sarah's already agreed to help with the sewing. She's better with a needle than she lets on." Over the following weeks, the wedding became a community project. The blacksmith crafted iron hooks for the schoolhouse that would hold lanterns for the evening ceremony. The carpenter built benches so guests would have somewhere to sit. Families contributed what they could: preserved fruits for the meal, wildflowers for decoration, promises of music and dancing afterward. Clara watched it all unfold with a mixture of gratitude and guilt. She'd arrived in this settlement as a stranger with nothing to offer but desperation, and now these people were investing their limited resources into celebrating her happiness. "Stop feeling guilty," Sarah commanded one afternoon as they worked on the dress together in the ranch house parlor. "You've given this settlement more than you realize. Before you came, we were just a collection of people trying not to die. Now we're a community with a future. That's worth celebrating." "I'm just teaching children to read." "You're teaching them to think beyond survival. You're showing them possibilities they wouldn't have imagined otherwise. Little Emma Johansson told her father she wants to go to university someday. Can you imagine? A rancher's daughter from the middle of nowhere dreaming of university?" Sarah pulled a stitch tight with practiced efficiency. "That's because of you. Because you showed her that education opens doors." Clara hadn't known about Emma's ambitions, and the revelation made her throat tight. "University is expensive. Her family will figure it out if she's serious. That's years away regardless. The point is she's dreaming bigger than she would have without you." Sarah paused in her sewing to look directly at Clara. "You changed this settlement's trajectory. People are staying who would have left. New families are arriving because word spread that we have a real school. The general store's profits are up because there are more customers. Even the land values have increased. Caleb got an offer last week for a parcel he's been trying to sell for 3 years. "I had no idea." "Of course you didn't. You're too busy teaching and planning lessons and trying not to accept credit for anything." Sarah returned to her stitching. "Well, I'm giving you credit whether you want it or not. You've been good for this place. And you've been good for my brother, which matters even more to me." "He's been good for me too." "I know. I've watched you come back to life over these months. When you first arrived, you looked like you were just going through motions, following some script someone else wrote. Now you look like you're actually living." Sarah tied off a thread and examined her work critically. "That's worth celebrating too." The dress came together beautifully over the following weeks. Simple lines that flattered without fuss, cream fabric that caught the light, careful embroidery at the collar that Sarah insisted on adding despite Clara's protests. When Clara tried it on for the final fitting, she barely recognized herself in the small mirror. She looked like a bride, yes, but more than that, she looked like a woman who'd chosen her own path and made peace with it. Meanwhile, Caleb threw himself into preparations at the ranch with equal intensity. He and several other men built a covered pavilion behind the schoolhouse where the reception meal would be served. He repaired the ranch house from top to bottom, fixing every loose board and broken shutter, insisting it needed to be perfect for when Clara moved in after the wedding. "You know I don't care about perfect," she told him one evening when she found him rehanging a door that had worked perfectly fine. "I know, but I care. This is going to be your home, and I want it to feel like one from the first day." He tested the door's swing, nodded with satisfaction, then pulled her close. "Besides, Keeping busy stops me from thinking too hard about how my life is about to change completely. Having second thoughts? Not even close. Just anticipation. The good kind, but intense. He kissed the top of her head. 2 more weeks. Those 2 weeks passed in a blur of final preparations and regular life somehow continuing alongside them. Clara still taught every day, her students now thoroughly invested in the wedding and prone to romantic speculation that made her simultaneously laugh and want to hide. "Will you wear flowers in your hair?" Mary Henderson asked during a geography lesson that had somehow derailed into wedding planning. "I haven't decided." "You should," Emma Johansson insisted. "And you should carry a bouquet. My mama says every bride should have flowers." "Your mama is probably right," Clara conceded, knowing when to surrender to 13-year-old romantic idealism. The boys pretended disinterest, but Clara caught them whispering about whether there would be dancing at the reception and if they'd be expected to participate. She made a mental note to warn Caleb that the male students would need encouragement to actually enjoy themselves instead of standing in corners looking uncomfortable. 3 days before this wedding, a supply wagon arrived from the territorial capital with an unexpected delivery. A package addressed to Clara Whitmore in handwriting she didn't recognize. Margaret brought it to the schoolhouse personally, curiosity written all over her face. "Came with the regular shipment," she said, hovering while Clara opened it. "I didn't order anything from you, so I'm dying to know what it is." Inside the package, wrapped in brown paper, Clara found a set of books, primers, readers, geography texts, and a beautiful leather-bound volume of poetry. Tucked inside the poetry book was a note in elegant script. "Dear Mrs. Whitmore, word has reached Denver of the school you've established in Dry Creek Crossing. The Territorial Education Association wishes to support your efforts. Please accept these books as a small contribution to your students' learning. Additional resources will be sent as funding allows. With admiration for your pioneering work, Mrs. Helena Whitfield, President, Territorial Education Association." Clara stared at the note, then at the books, then back at the note. "The Territorial Education Association knows about our school?" "Apparently." Margaret picked up one of the readers, examining it with approval. "These are quality texts. This Mrs. Whitfield clearly isn't sending cast-offs." "But how did she even hear about us?" "I may have written to her." Sarah's voice came from the doorway, where she stood looking pleased with herself. "Back in February, told her about the school, about you, about what you were accomplishing out here. Figured it couldn't hurt to ask for support." Clara set down the books and crossed to hug Sarah tightly. "You're entirely too good at interfering in people's lives. I prefer to think of it as facilitating positive outcomes." Sarah hugged her back just as fiercely. "Besides, you deserve recognition for what you're doing, and the students deserve good materials." That evening, Clara brought the books to show Caleb, who examined them with the careful attention he gave everything she considered important. "This is significant," he said, turning the poetry volume over in his hands. "The association doesn't usually acknowledge schools this small or this remote. They must have been genuinely impressed by whatever Sarah wrote." "It feels surreal. When I started teaching, I just wanted to give these children basic literacy. I never imagined it would become something people in Denver cared about." "That's because you think too small sometimes. You see the individual students in front of you, which is good. That's exactly what a teacher should see. But other people see the bigger picture, the precedent you're setting, the model you're creating for other frontier settlements." Clara sat down heavily in one of the ranch house chairs, overwhelmed by the implications. "I don't know how to be a model for anything. I'm just doing my best day by day." "That's exactly what makes you a model. You're not following some grand theoretical framework. You're solving real problems with practical solutions. Other teachers can learn from that." Caleb set down the book and knelt beside her chair. "Clara, you need to accept that you've done something remarkable here. Not just for the students or the settlement, but for yourself. You took tragedy and loss and turned it into purpose and impact. That's not common. That's exceptional." She looked at this man who saw her more clearly than anyone ever had, who believed in her capabilities even when she doubted them, who'd offered her not just love but partnership in building something meaningful. "I couldn't have done any of this without you," she said quietly. "Without you and Sarah and this whole impossible community, I'd probably be dead in Redstone Valley if you hadn't appeared that day. Maybe, or maybe you would have figured something else out. You're resourceful like that, but I'm grateful every day that I did appear, that I got to be part of your story. He took her hands. 2 more days, and you'll be my wife. Sometimes I still can't quite believe it. 2 more days, Clara echoed, letting the reality of it wash over her. In 48 hours, she would stand before the community that had embraced her and pledge herself to a future she'd chosen with clear eyes and full heart. The thought was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. The day before the wedding brought chaos of the best kind. Women descended on the schoolhouse to transform it into a venue suitable for ceremony and celebration. Wildflowers were gathered by the armload, lupine and Indian paintbrush, columbine and prairie roses, and arranged in every available container. The benches were positioned just so. Lanterns were hung and tested. The pavilion behind the building was set with tables made from sawhorses and boards, covered with whatever tablecloths the settlement could collectively provide. Clara tried to help, but was consistently shooed away by women who insisted the bride should rest and preserve her energy. She ended up sitting on the schoolhouse steps watching the controlled chaos, marveling at how this building she'd helped design had become the beating heart of the community. Nervous? Margaret asked, sitting down beside her with 2 cups of water drawn from the creek. Terrified, Clara admitted. Not about marrying Caleb, that feels right in every way, but about being the center of attention, about living up to everyone's expectations, about all these people investing so much in celebrating something that's really just 2 people making a commitment. That's where you're wrong. It's not just about you and Caleb. It's about all of us affirming that life out here can include joy and beauty and hope, not just survival. Every wedding, every birth, every celebration reminds us we're building something that will outlast us. Margaret sipped her water thoughtfully. My husband and I were married in a tent during a rainstorm with 3 witnesses and a traveling preacher who was mostly drunk. It was terrible and perfect, and I wouldn't change a single detail. But I also wish we'd had what you're getting tomorrow. A community celebration, people investing in our happiness, a sense that our union mattered beyond just the 2 of us. I'm sorry you lost him. So am I. Every day still, even after 12 years. But that's the price of loving someone. When they're gone, the loss is proportional to the love. If I had the choice to love him less so the loss hurt less, I wouldn't take it. She turned to look at Clara directly. You know that already, don't you, from your first husband? Clara nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Then you also know that choosing to love again, choosing to risk that loss again, takes extraordinary courage. I never managed it, haven't found anyone who made it feel worth the risk. But you have. That's something to be proud of, not nervous about. The words settled into Clara's chest, finding the places that still carried old grief and new hope intertwined. She'd been so focused on whether she was being fair to Samuel's memory that she hadn't considered she was also honoring it by choosing to live fully instead of merely existing. Thank you, she said when she could speak again, for understanding, for helping make tomorrow possible. Thank you for giving us something to celebrate. Now go home, get some rest, and tomorrow let yourself be happy without qualification or guilt. You've earned it. Clara spent that last evening at the cabin that had been her home for the past 8 months, surrounded by the few possessions she'd accumulated. Tomorrow she would move to the ranch, begin her life as Caleb's wife, step fully into the future she'd been building piece by piece. The thought should have been daunting, but instead it felt like a natural progression, like a river finding its proper course after being temporarily diverted. Sarah arrived just before sunset with a basket of food and adamant instructions that Clara eat properly and sleep well. I won't have you fainting during your own wedding because you were too nervous to take care of yourself, she declared, unpacking bread and cheese and cold chicken. Eat, then sleep. I'll be back at dawn to help you dress. You're very bossy. Someone has to be. Left to your own devices, you'd probably teach a lesson tomorrow morning and show up to your wedding still covered in chalk dust. Sarah's tone was affectionate despite the criticism. Clara, I want you to know, having you as a sister makes me happier than almost anything else that's happened since we came to this territory. Caleb's been different since he met you. More alive. More himself somehow. He's been the same for me, given me reasons to build a life instead of just endure one. Then you're perfect for each other, which is exactly what I told him when he was nervous about proposing too soon. Sarah pulled Clara into a quick hug. Welcome to our family, officially tomorrow, but really you've been part of it for months. After Sarah left, Clara ate the food mechanically, then laid out the cream-colored dress for tomorrow. She touched the careful embroidery at the collar, remembering all the conversations she and Sarah had shared while creating it. Each stitch represented hours of companionship, laughter, growing friendship that had become as vital as any blood relation. Sleep came surprisingly easily, and Clara dreamed of wildflowers and open sky, and a future that stretched endlessly forward, full of possibility. Dawn arrived clear and perfect, the sky painted in shades of pink and gold that promised good weather. Sarah appeared exactly as promised, carrying additional flowers and a determination to make Clara presentable. "You're beautiful already, but we're going to make you spectacular," she announced, setting to work with pins and ribbons and the kind of focused intensity usually reserved for complicated ranch tasks. By the time she finished, Clara barely recognized herself. The dress fit perfectly. The flowers Sarah had woven into her pinned-up hair caught the morning light, and her face, free of the constant stress and worry that had marked her arrival months ago, looked younger, happier, at peace. "There," Sarah said with satisfaction. "My brother is going to forget how to speak when he sees you." The walk to the schoolhouse felt surreal. Clara's arm linked through Sarah's while the early sun warmed their faces. They could already hear activity from the building, voices raised in laughter and occasional instruction, the sounds of final preparations. Margaret met them at the door, her own face showing rare emotion. "You look perfect. Everyone's ready. Are you?" Clara took a deep breath, steadying herself. "I'm ready." The interior of the schoolhouse had been transformed. Flowers covered every surface, their wild beauty bringing the frontier indoors. Benches were filled with settlers who'd become friends and family, faces she'd grown to know and care for over the past months. At the front, near the fireplace, stood Caleb in his best clothes, dark trousers, white shirt, vest that Sarah had pressed until it was nearly stiff. His hair was neatly combed, his face clean-shaven, but his eyes held the same steady warmth they always did. He saw her enter and his expression shifted into something so openly adoring that Clara felt her nervousness dissolve into certainty. This was right. This was exactly where she was supposed to be. The ceremony itself was simple, conducted by a circuit judge who happened to be passing through and had agreed to perform the marriage. Clara barely heard the words, too focused on Caleb's hands holding hers, his voice steady as he made promises she knew he'd keep. "I, Caleb Ridge, take you, Clara Whitmore, to be my wife. I promise to stand beside you in all circumstances, to support your dreams as fiercely as I pursue my own, to build a life with you based on honesty and respect, and whatever love we continue to grow between us." When it was her turn, Clara found her voice surprisingly clear. "I, Clara Whitmore, take you, Caleb Ridge, to be my husband. I promise to choose you every day, to build our future together with courage and honesty, to be your partner in all the ways that matter most." The judge pronounced them married. Caleb kissed her with appropriate restraint for a public setting, and the schoolhouse erupted in cheers and applause. Clara found herself laughing, overwhelmed by joy so pure it felt almost painful. The reception that followed was everything Margaret had promised. Abundant food despite limited resources, music provided by a settler with a fiddle and another with a mouth harp, dancing that started tentatively and quickly became enthusiastic. Clara danced with Caleb, with various settlers who wanted to congratulate her personally, even with some of her older students who'd overcome their shyness about participating. As the sun began setting and lanterns were lit, casting warm golden light across the celebration, Clara found a quiet moment with Caleb away from the crowd. They stood at the edge of the schoolhouse yard, looking out at the valley that had become their home. "Happy?" he asked, pulling her close against the evening chill. "Happier than I ever thought I'd be again," she answered honestly. "When I stood at that crossroads last summer, dying of thirst and despair, I couldn't have imagined this. Any of this. Life's funny that way. Sometimes the worst moments lead to the best outcomes." He kissed the top of her head. "Thank you for saying yes, for choosing this life, for choosing me. Thank you for appearing through the heat haze like some kind of miracle, for offering water and truth and everything that came after. They stood together watching the celebration continue, watching the community they'd both invested in enjoy this moment of pure happiness. The schoolhouse bell rang out suddenly. Sarah, Clara saw, pulling the rope with enthusiastic vigor, and the sound carried across the valley clear and bright, announcing to the empty wilderness that life was flourishing here, that the frontier could hold more than just hardship and survival. Later that night, after the last guests had departed and Clara had changed from her wedding dress into traveling clothes, she and Caleb rode together back to the ranch that was now her home. The sky was brilliant with stars, the air cool and sweet with the scent of sage and growing things. Sarah had tactfully arranged to stay in town with Margaret for a few days, giving them privacy to settle into their new life together. The ranch house waited, windows glowing with lamplight Caleb had left burning, everything ready for this new chapter to begin. Inside, Clara looked around with fresh eyes. This was hers now, not just a place she visited, but home. Her home. Their home. The thought was still settling into her consciousness, becoming real. "Regrets?" Caleb asked, watching her take in the familiar space made unfamiliar by context. "None." "You?" "None." He crossed to where she stood and took her hands. "Clara Ridge. That's going to take some getting used to. For both of us." She tested the name herself. Clara Ridge? Teacher? Wife? Frontier woman? None of those were things I imagined becoming a year ago. And now? Now I can't imagine being anything else. She pulled him closer, rising on her toes to kiss him properly, thoroughly, without the restraint required by public settings. Now I'm exactly where I choose to be. The days following the wedding settled into new rhythms. Clara continued teaching, but now she rode to the schoolhouse each morning from the ranch instead of walking from her cabin. She discovered that married life with Caleb was remarkably easy. They'd spent enough time together during their courtship to know each other's habits and preferences, to understand when to give space and when to offer company. Sarah returned from her diplomatic absence with cheerful commentary about how domesticated her brother had become, and delight at having another woman in the house permanently. The three of them developed comfortable routines, shared meals, evening conversations on the porch, division of ranch labor that played to each person's strengths. Clara had expected some difficult adjustment period, some friction between her independence and the requirements of partnership. But Caleb had meant what he said about partnership being two people supporting each other's dreams instead of one subsumming to the other's will. He never questioned her dedication to teaching, never suggested she should focus solely on ranch duties, never made her feel that her work was less important than his. In turn, Clara learned the rhythms of ranch life, helping where she could without trying to become someone she wasn't. She discovered she had a knack for the financial record-keeping Caleb hated, and took over managing the accounts. She learned which cattle were which, how to spot signs of illness in the stock, when to worry about weather, and when to trust it would pass. By the end of June, a month into marriage, Clara realized she'd been unconsciously waiting for something to go wrong, for the happiness to reveal itself as temporary or conditional. But it didn't. Life had its challenges, certainly. Students who struggled, cattle that got sick, weather that didn't cooperate, the thousand small difficulties of frontier existence. But underneath it all was a foundation of contentment that felt permanent, built on solid ground rather than shifting sand. One evening in early July, she and Caleb sat on the porch watching the sun set, while Sarah worked inside on some sewing project. The valley spread before them in all its harsh beauty, the land that had nearly killed her now feeling like the only place she wanted to be. "What are you thinking about?" Caleb asked, following her gaze across the landscape. "About how strange life is. How the worst tragedy can lead to the best outcome if you're brave enough to let it." She turned to look at him. Samuel's death was devastating. Losing him, losing the future we'd planned, it broke something in me. But it also freed me to build something better, something that's actually mine. "You think you wouldn't have been happy with him if he'd lived?" Clara considered the question carefully, trying to be honest without being cruel to memory. "I think I would have been content. I loved him, and we would have built a decent life together. But I was following his dream, not creating my own. I'd traded one set of expectations for another, my aunt's version of who I should be for Samuel's version of who we'd become together. I never asked myself who I wanted to be independent of anyone else's vision. And now? Now I know. I'm a teacher who finds purpose in opening children's minds. I'm a woman who loves the frontier despite its brutality because it offers freedom that civilized society never could. I'm a wife who chose her husband with clear eyes and full knowledge of what partnership means. She reached for his hand. I'm myself, finally, completely. And it took losing everything to find that. Caleb squeezed her hand gently. I'm glad you found it. Even gladder you found it here with me. So am I. They sat in comfortable silence as the sky darkened and stars began emerging. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to the rising moon. The night air carried the scent of summer growth, grass and wildflowers, and the dusty sweetness of land responding to recent rain. The association sent another letter, Clara mentioned, remembering the mail that had arrived that afternoon. They want to send someone to observe the school in the fall, see how we're doing, offer advice on curriculum development. That's good, isn't it? I think so. A little intimidating, but good. It means they're taking us seriously, seeing Dry Creek Crossing as a legitimate educational enterprise instead of just a frontier experiment. Because it is legitimate. You've built something real here, Clara. Something that'll outlast both of us if we're lucky and smart about maintaining it. The thought of the school continuing beyond her own involvement had occurred to Clara before, but hearing Caleb articulate it made it feel more concrete. She was building infrastructure, not just teaching current students. She was creating something that could serve generations if properly sustained. We'll need more teachers eventually, she mused. As the settlement grows, as more families arrive, one person can't manage 30 or 40 students across multiple grades indefinitely. Then we'll recruit more teachers. The association might help with that. They clearly see value in what you're doing. They might have recent graduates looking for positions, people willing to come west for the right opportunity. Clara imagined it. A school with multiple teachers, separate classrooms for different ages, a real curriculum supported by proper resources. It seemed impossibly ambitious, but so had the original schoolhouse before it became reality. One step at a time, Caleb said, reading her expression. You don't have to solve every future problem tonight. Just keep doing what you're doing, and the rest will follow when it's ready. He was right, of course. Clara had spent so much of her life either dwelling in the past or worrying about the future that she sometimes forgot to simply exist in the present. Here, now, on this porch, with this man in this place they'd both chosen, this was enough. This was everything. Summer deepened into August, bringing heat that shimmered off the valley floor in waves and storms that rolled through with dramatic intensity before disappearing as quickly as they'd arrived. Clara closed the school for the season as planned, giving the older students time to help with harvests and the younger ones a break from structured learning. But she found herself unable to completely step away, spending her free mornings organizing the growing library and planning curriculum for the fall term. The observer from the Territorial Education Association was scheduled to arrive in late September, and Clara felt the weight of that impending evaluation more heavily as the date approached. She reorganized the bookshelves 3 times, drafted and redrafted lesson plans, worried over every detail until Caleb finally intervened one evening in mid-August. You're going to drive yourself crazy, he said, finding her hunched over paperwork at the kitchen table well past sundown. The school is excellent. The students are thriving. Some education bureaucrat from Denver isn't going to change those facts. What if they find us inadequate? What if they decide we don't meet territorial standards and withdraw their support? Then we'll continue doing exactly what we've been doing with or without their approval. Clara, you've built something real here. You don't need validation from some association to know that. She wanted to believe him, but the insecurity ran deeper than rational thought could reach. She'd poured everything into the school, her energy, her hopes, her sense of purpose. The idea that someone might judge it insufficient felt like a judgment on her entire transformation from broken widow to capable teacher. Sarah, overhearing the conversation from the parlor where she'd been reading, joined them in the kitchen with her usual directness. You're afraid they'll confirm what you still secretly believe, that you're not actually qualified for this, that you've been pretending competence and someone's finally going to notice. Clara stared at her sister-in-law, startled by how accurately she'd identified the fear. That's not, it is exactly that. I've watched you question yourself constantly despite overwhelming evidence that you're exceptional at this work. You compare yourself to some imaginary standard of what a real teacher should be, forgetting that you're defining what that means out here. Sarah pulled out a chair and sat down firmly. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to stop preparing and start trusting. You're going to remember that you've already proven yourself to the people who actually matter, the students, their families, this community. And you're going to greet this observer with confidence instead of apology. I don't know how to do that. Yes, you do. You just choose not to because doubt feels safer than confidence. Doubt doesn't risk disappointment. Sarah's expression softened slightly. But you can't build the future while hiding in doubt, Clara. At some point, you have to stand in your own accomplishments and say, yes, I did this, and it's good. The words struck Clara like a physical blow, not painful, but forceful enough to shift something that had been lodged in her chest since long before she'd arrived in this territory. Sarah was right. She'd been treating her success as temporary, as something that could be revoked if she didn't constantly prove herself worthy. But worthiness wasn't something external authorities granted. It was something she had to claim for herself. You're right, she said quietly. You're absolutely right, and I hate that you're right. Sarah grinned. Get used to it. I'm right about most things. Caleb laughed, the tension in the room breaking like a storm, finally releasing its rain. She really is. It's insufferable but useful. The conversation marked a shift in Clara's approach to the upcoming evaluation. She stopped second-guessing her curriculum choices and instead focused on documenting what actually worked. She compiled examples of student progress, writing samples showing dramatic improvement, mathematics problems solved with increasing sophistication, geography lessons that had sparked genuine curiosity about the wider world. By the time late September arrived, she had a portfolio that demonstrated real achievement rather than theoretical competence. The observer arrived on a crisp autumn morning when the valley was painted in shades of gold and amber. Mrs. Helena Whitfield turned out to be a handsome woman of perhaps 50, with silver-streaked hair, intelligent eyes, and the kind of practical clothing that suggested she understood frontier realities. She greeted Clara with a firm handshake and immediate directness. Mrs. Ridge, thank you for accommodating this visit. The association has been quite impressed by the reports we've received about your school, and I wanted to see firsthand what you've accomplished here. Clara led her through the schoolhouse, explaining her approach to mixed-age instruction, demonstrating the materials she'd developed for different skill levels, showing the progress records she maintained for each student. Mrs. Whitfield asked sharp, probing questions that initially felt like challenges, but gradually revealed themselves as genuine interest. How do you manage assessment when students are working at such different levels, she asked, examining a set of student writing samples. Individual conferences, Clara explained. Each student meets with me weekly to review their work, set goals, and discuss challenges. It's time-intensive, but it allows me to tailor instruction to actual need rather than assumed grade level. And the older students, how do you keep them engaged when they're academically advanced but still limited by frontier resources? I encourage independent study projects. Emma Johansson is currently reading everything she can find about university programs because she's decided she wants to pursue higher education. Tom Henderson is working through advanced mathematics because he wants to understand engineering principles. They present their findings to younger students, which reinforces their own learning while exposing the younger ones to possibilities they might not have considered. Mrs. Whitfield made notes in a small leather-bound journal, her expression unreadable. You've essentially created a one-room schoolhouse model that functions as both primary education and college preparatory. That's unusual. It's necessary. These children don't have the luxury of waiting until they're older to decide their futures. If they're going to have choices, they need exposure to advanced concepts early. Clara paused, then added with more confidence than she'd felt weeks ago, I'm not following any established model because no established model addresses our specific circumstances. I'm solving the problems in front of me with the resources available. That's precisely the kind of innovative thinking the association wants to encourage. Mrs. Whitfield looked up from her notes, and Clara saw approval in her expression. Too many frontier schools try to replicate Eastern educational models that don't translate to Western realities. You've done something more valuable. You've created an approach that serves your actual students rather than theoretical ones. The validation hit Clara with unexpected force. She'd spent months worried that her improvised methods would be judged inadequate, when instead they were being recognized as innovative. The irony wasn't lost on her. Over the next 3 days, Mrs. Whitfield observed classes, interviewed students and parents, reviewed curriculum materials, and asked increasingly detailed questions about Clara's long-term vision for the school. She stayed at the ranch as a guest, joining evening meals and conversations that ranged from educational theory to frontier practicalities. "You have a remarkable setup here," she commented one evening over Sarah's excellent stew. A supportive family structure, an engaged community, a teacher with both passion and pragmatism. Most frontier schools lack at least one of those elements. "We've been fortunate," Clara said, "or maybe we've been deliberate about building what's needed, probably both." Deliberate is the correct word. Mrs. Whitfield set down her spoon and leaned back in her chair. "Mrs. Ridge, I'm going to be direct with you. The association wants to feature your school as a model program. We'd like to document your methods, share them with other frontier communities, possibly even establish a training program where prospective teachers could observe your approach before establishing schools of their own." Clara felt her mouth go dry. "I'm not sure I understand." "We want to replicate your success, not by imposing your exact methods elsewhere. Each community needs to adapt to its own circumstances, but by demonstrating that effective frontier education requires innovation rather than imitation of Eastern schools. You've proven it can be done, and done well. We want to help others learn from your example." I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Sarah interjected from across the table. "Obviously, say yes." "There would be additional support, of course," Mrs. Whitfield continued. "More books and materials, a small stipend for the administrative work of documenting your methods, possible assistance recruiting additional teachers as the school grows. The association is committed to expanding quality education in the territories, and your school represents exactly the kind of program we want to encourage." Caleb reached under the table and squeezed Clara's hand, support and encouragement in one simple gesture. She looked around the table at her family, then thought about her students and the community that had embraced her, and felt the magnitude of what was being offered settle into her bones. "Yes," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion churning in her chest. "Yes, I'd be honored to participate in that program." Mrs. Whitfield smiled, genuine warmth breaking through her professional demeanor. "Excellent. I'll begin the paperwork when I return to Denver. Expect correspondence within the month with specific details and next steps." After Mrs. Whitfield departed 3 days later, full of praise and promises of continued support, Clara stood in the empty schoolhouse trying to process what had just happened. She'd come to this territory following a dead man's dream, desperate and directionless. Now she was being recognized as an educational innovator, her work held up as a model for others to follow. The transformation felt surreal, like she was living someone else's life. But the schoolhouse around her was undeniably real. The students' work displayed on walls, the books organized on shelves, the bell waiting to call children to learning when the fall term resumed. This was hers. She'd built it from nothing but determination and improvisation and stubborn refusal to accept that frontier children deserved less than their Eastern counterparts. "You look stunned," Caleb said from the doorway, where he'd been quietly watching her process. "I am stunned. A year ago I was dying of thirst at a crossroads. Now I'm apparently a model educator. How does that happen?" "You make choices. You work hard. You refuse to give up when things are difficult. And eventually, if you're lucky and persistent, people notice." He crossed to where she stood and pulled her close. "I'm proud of you. Not because some association validated your work, because you've been doing work worth validating from the very beginning." Clara leaned into his solid presence, letting herself feel the pride she'd been too uncertain to claim. "This is going to change things, isn't it? The school, the settlement, everything." "Probably. Change isn't bad, though, not when it's growth instead of destruction. I'm not sure I'm ready to be some kind of educational authority. I'm still figuring things out myself." "That's what makes you effective. You're solving real problems in real time instead of applying theoretical solutions to hypothetical situations." He kissed the top of her head. "Besides, you won't be doing it alone. You've got this whole community supporting you, including a husband who's reasonably intelligent and a sister-in-law who's inconveniently always right about everything. Clara laughed despite her nervousness. When did I get so lucky? When you chose to build something new instead of clinging to something dead. The rest followed from that choice. The fall term resumed in October with 18 students instead of the previous year's 13. Word had continued to spread about the school's quality, drawing families who might have settled elsewhere. Clara found herself managing not just increased enrollment, but increased expectations. Parents asking about advanced curriculum, students requesting specific subjects. The community investing more heavily in educational infrastructure because they believed in its value. The association's promised support arrived in November. Crates of books, new slates and chalk, maps and globes, writing supplies, and materials Clara had only dreamed of accessing. With these resources came responsibility. Monthly reports documenting methods and progress, periodic visits from association representatives, the awareness that her work was being scrutinized as a potential model. The pressure could have been crushing, but Clara found it oddly motivating. She'd spent so much of her life trying to meet other people's expectations that having high expectations based on her actual capabilities felt refreshing. She wasn't being judged against some arbitrary standard of feminine accomplishment or social propriety. She was being evaluated on whether she could effectively educate children in difficult circumstances. That was a challenge she could meet. Winter arrived early that year, with the first serious snow falling in mid-November. But unlike the previous year's scrambling improvisation, this winter found the settlement prepared. Families had laid in adequate supplies, the schoolhouse had stockpiled firewood and lamp oil, and Clara had developed contingency lesson plans for when weather prevented regular attendance. She also discovered she was pregnant in early December, the realization arriving with a mixture of joy and terror that sent her into Margaret's store seeking advice from someone who'd navigated frontier life for years. "You're scared," Margaret observed after Clara had stammered through her news. "That's normal. Having a baby out here is different than in Philadelphia." "Everything is different than in Philadelphia. That's the problem. I don't know how to do this without proper doctors, without hospitals, without the safety nets I took for granted back east. You do it the way women have been doing it since the beginning of time, with help from other women who've been through it. I've attended more births than I can count. Sarah's assisted with ranch animals, which translates better to human births than you'd think. We have a midwife who passes through every few months and can time her next visit for when you're due. You won't be alone in this." The reassurance helped, but Clara still felt the weight of this new responsibility pressing down on everything else she'd built. How would she manage teaching while pregnant? What about after the baby arrived? Could she balance motherhood with her commitment to the school? She brought these concerns to Caleb that evening, finding him in the barn checking on a mare that was close to foaling. He listened without interrupting, his hand steady on the horse's neck, then turned to her with characteristic directness. "You're assuming you have to choose between being a mother and being a teacher. Why?" "Because how can I possibly do both effectively? One or the other is going to suffer. Or you'll figure out how to integrate them, same as you figured out everything else that seemed impossible at first. Clara, you managed to cross half a continent alone. You built a school from nothing. You transformed a dying settlement into a thriving community. You really think a baby is going to defeat you?" Put that way, her fears sounded almost absurd, but the terror was real nonetheless. The fear of failing at something so fundamentally important, of proving herself inadequate in ways that would affect an innocent child. "What if I'm not a good mother?" she whispered, voicing the deepest fear. "Then you'll learn to be better, same as you learned to be a good teacher. Nobody starts out perfect at anything, Clara. You work at it, you make mistakes, you adjust and try again. That's all anyone can do." He pulled her close, and she could feel his heart beating steady against her cheek. "Besides, our child is going to have you as a mother, smart, brave, stubborn, passionate about learning and growth. That's a pretty good foundation to build on." Sarah's reaction to the news was characteristically enthusiastic and practical in equal measure. She immediately began planning modifications to the ranch house to accommodate a nursery, making lists of supplies they'd need and declaring herself the baby's future favorite aunt with absolute certainty. "You'll keep teaching, obviously," she said, as if there'd never been any question. We'll figure out childcare between ranch work and school schedules. Plenty of women manage both out here. You just have to be creative about it. You make it sound simple. It won't be simple. It'll be complicated and exhausting and occasionally infuriating, but you'll manage because you always do. Sarah paused in her list-making to look at Clara directly. You're going to be a wonderful mother. Stop doubting yourself and start planning practically. That's how you handle everything else successfully. The pregnancy progressed through winter with relatively few complications beyond the expected fatigue and occasional nausea. Clara continued teaching through January and February, only reducing her schedule when the weather made travel difficult anyway. Her students, once they understood what was happening, became protectively solicitous in ways that were both touching and amusing. Mrs. Ridge, you shouldn't be carrying those books, Tom Henderson would insist, taking heavy texts from her hands despite her protests. Do you need to sit down? You should sit down, Emma Johansson would fret whenever Clara stood for too long. Even the youngest students seemed to sense something significant was happening, treating their teacher with a gentleness that spoke to how thoroughly she'd become part of their lives. The association's winter correspondence brought news that exceeded Clara's expectations. 3 other frontier settlements had requested information about replicating her school model. 2 prospective teachers had written asking if they could observe her methods. And the association was proposing to publish a handbook based on her approach, with her as the primary author. They want me to write a book, she told Caleb, staring at the letter in disbelief. A teaching manual for frontier education. Makes sense. You've developed methods worth documenting. I don't know how to write a book. I'm a teacher, not an author. You write lesson plans and student assessments constantly. A book is just that, organized differently and aimed at a different audience. He read over her shoulder, scanning the association's proposal. They're offering to pay you for it, too. That's not insignificant. The financial aspect hadn't even registered in Clara's initial shock, but seeing the proposed payment now, she realized it represented real money, enough to hire an assistant teacher, or expand the library significantly, or invest in the settlement's infrastructure in ways that would benefit everyone. I suppose I could try, she said slowly. Document what I've been doing anyway, organize it into something others could use. That's the spirit. Tentative agreement followed by determined execution. Your approach to everything. Clara wrote to the association accepting their proposal, then spent the remaining winter months drafting chapters between teaching and pregnancy fatigue. The writing came easier than she'd anticipated once she stopped trying to sound like an educational theorist and simply explained what worked in plain language. The words flowed naturally. By March, as snow began melting and the first hints of spring appeared, she had a rough draft of 8 chapters covering everything from mixed-age classroom management to developing curriculum with limited resources to engaging families in educational support. Sarah read it and declared it brilliant. Margaret read it and suggested several practical additions. Caleb read it and offered the highest praise he could give. This is useful. Teachers will actually use this. The manuscript went to Denver in April, and Clara turned her attention to preparing for both the baby's arrival and the spring term resumption. The school had outgrown its single-room capacity, and several ranchers had volunteered to add an addition over the summer, a second classroom that would allow Clara to hire the assistant teacher the association had suggested. We're building something permanent, she said to Caleb one evening as they walked around the construction site, imagining the expanded school, something that'll outlast us. That's the goal, isn't it? Create infrastructure that serves beyond our own lifetimes. It's strange to think about. A year and a half ago, I was just trying to survive. Now I'm planning for decades into the future. That's what happens when you stop running from the past and start building toward the future. You get invested in outcomes that extend beyond yourself. The baby arrived in late May, 3 weeks before the spring term ended. Clara went into labor on a Tuesday afternoon, Sarah and Margaret attending while Caleb paced nervously in the front room. The birth was difficult, long and painful in ways no one had adequately prepared her for. But when she finally held her daughter, a tiny red-faced creature with a surprisingly loud cry, the terror transformed into something more complex and profound. She's perfect, Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. Absolutely perfect. Caleb entered once things had been cleaned up, and Clara was presentable, his face showing naked emotion she'd rarely seen. He approached the bed cautiously, as if afraid to disturb something sacred, and looked down at his daughter with such wonder that Clara felt her own tears start. "Hello, little one," he said softly. "Welcome to the world." They named her Rose Margaret Ridge, Rose for the wild prairie roses that bloomed across the valley each spring, Margaret for the woman who'd been Clara's first friend in this territory. Margaret herself wept openly when they told her, all her usual stoicism dissolving into pure emotion. "You've honored me beyond measure," she said, holding the baby with practiced ease. "I'll do my best to deserve the namesake." The settlement celebrated Rose's arrival with the same communal enthusiasm they'd brought to Clara and Caleb's wedding. Families brought meals, handmade baby clothes, carved toys, and endless advice about infant care. The older students visited in solemn groups, treating the baby like a fragile miracle, which in many ways she was. Clara had worried about managing both motherhood and teaching, but she discovered, as Caleb had predicted, that the frontier demanded integration rather than separation of roles. She brought Rose to the schoolhouse in a basket, teaching while the baby slept nearby. When Rose woke and needed attention, older students took over younger students' lessons, creating a system that actually enhanced learning by giving advanced students teaching experience. This is unconventional, the association's next observer noted when visiting in late June. "Everything about frontier education is unconventional," Clara replied, nursing Rose while simultaneously reviewing a student's mathematics work. "We adapt to circumstances rather than forcing circumstances to adapt to theoretical ideals." The observer, a younger woman named Miss Peterson, smiled with what looked like relief. "That's exactly what I hoped you'd say. The handbook you wrote emphasizes practical adaptation, but I wasn't sure if you actually practiced it or just preached it. Out here, we don't have the luxury of theoretical purity. We do what works and adjust what doesn't." Miss Peterson spent 2 weeks observing and taking copious notes. She was particularly interested in how Clara managed the expanded curriculum with an assistant teacher, a young man named David Chen, who'd arrived in April after corresponding with the association. Chen had formal training from a teacher's college back east, but was struggling to apply that training to frontier realities. And Clara found herself in the unexpected position of mentoring someone with more official credentials than she possessed. "The textbook says to separate students by age and ability," Chen said one afternoon, frustrated by his inability to make the prescribed methods work. "The textbook assumes you have enough students to create meaningful divisions and enough space to house them separately. We have neither. So we create learning groups based on actual skill level regardless of age, rotate students through different activities to keep everyone engaged, and use peer teaching to reinforce concepts while giving everyone something valuable to contribute. But that's not what I was trained to do." "Then consider this a different kind of training. Frontier education requires improvisation within structure, adaptation without losing sight of core goals. You're learning that now, which will make you a better teacher than rigid adherence to methods designed for different circumstances ever could." Chen absorbed her words with the same serious attention he brought to everything, and Clara saw him gradually relax into the reality of what teaching actually required in this context. By June's end, he was developing his own adaptations, creating solutions she hadn't considered, bringing fresh perspective that enhanced rather than contradicted her established approach. "You're good at this," Caleb observed one evening after Chen had left for the boarding house where he rented a room. "Mentoring, developing other teachers. I'm figuring it out as I go, same as everything else. Maybe that's the secret. You don't pretend to have all the answers, you just model how to find answers when they're needed." Summer brought both celebration and change. The school addition was completed, giving them 2 proper classrooms and space for up to 40 students. The association published Clara's handbook, and copies began circulating through frontier territories with gratifying feedback. Enrollment for the fall term reached 23 students, requiring both Clara and Chen to teach full-time while sharing administrative duties. And through it all, Rose grew. From fragile newborn to sturdy infant, her presence woven into the fabric of Clara's daily life in ways that felt natural rather than disruptive. She attended school in her basket, or later in a chair modified to keep her safe and contained. Students learned to work around her needs, and she learned to sleep through the normal noise of an active classroom. "This is going to be her normal," Sarah observed one afternoon, watching Rose gurgle happily while students recited multiplication tables nearby. Growing up in a schoolhouse, surrounded by learning, with a mother who's both teacher and role model, I worry sometimes that it's too much, that she needs more stability, more conventional childhood experiences. She's growing up in a loving family within a supportive community, watching her mother do meaningful work that helps others. That's more stability than most children get, frontier or otherwise. Sarah adjusted Rose's blanket with practiced ease. Stop worrying about providing some imaginary perfect childhood and focus on providing the real good childhood that's actually available. It's more than enough. As summer faded into autumn and the new term approached, Clara stood in the expanded schoolhouse, now truly a school rather than just a single room with ambitions, and felt the full weight of transformation settle into her bones. She'd arrived in this territory lost and desperate, following a dead man's dream to a destination that would have killed her. Instead, she'd found a crossroads where a stranger offered water and wisdom, and she'd been brave enough to choose a different path. That choice had led to everything else: teaching that became purpose, community that became family, love that became partnership, and now motherhood that was teaching her new dimensions of courage and commitment. The journey from dying of thirst at a lonely intersection to standing in a thriving school holding her daughter felt impossible. Yet here she was, living proof that transformation was possible when you were brave enough to claim it. The years that followed Rose's birth brought a rhythm to Clara's life that felt both demanding and deeply satisfying. Each season turned with its familiar patterns. Spring terms beginning with renewed energy, summers dedicated to curriculum development and building maintenance, autumn bringing harvest and preparation for winter's isolation, winter itself offering time for reflection and planning between the challenges of frontier survival. By the time Rose turned 2, the school had become the undisputed heart of Dry Creek Crossing. Enrollment had climbed to 31 students, requiring Clara and David Chen to develop increasingly sophisticated systems for managing mixed abilities across 2 classrooms. The association continued sending support, books, materials, occasional visiting observers who documented their methods for replication elsewhere. Clara's handbook had gone through 2 printings, and she'd been asked to write a follow-up volume addressing questions that had emerged from teachers attempting to implement her approaches. The settlement itself had transformed in ways that both delighted and occasionally overwhelmed her. What had been 40 struggling souls when she arrived now numbered close to 120. New businesses had opened, a proper saloon with rooms for travelers, a second general store, a bakery run by a German couple who produced bread that rivaled Sarah's. The town had elected an actual mayor, though Margaret Hartley remained the de facto authority on most matters through sheer force of personality and accumulated knowledge. Most significantly, 3 more teachers had arrived over the past year, drawn by the school's reputation and the association's active recruitment. What had started as Clara's one-room improvisation had evolved into a genuine educational institution with multiple teachers, a formal curriculum, and ambitions that extended beyond basic literacy into genuine academic preparation. "We're going to need another building," David Chen said one afternoon in early spring as they reviewed enrollment projections for the coming term. "At this rate, we'll have 45 students by next fall. The current structure can't accommodate that many effectively." Clara looked at the numbers, feeling equal parts pride and apprehension. "The community has already invested so much in expansion, I'm not sure they can afford another major construction project." "Then maybe we need to look beyond the community for funding. The association, territorial grants, private benefactors interested in frontier education." Chen tapped the enrollment figures thoughtfully. "Mrs. Ridge, what we've built here is attracting attention beyond just educational circles. This settlement is growing because of the school. That's a powerful story. There are people and organizations that would fund expansion as an investment in westward development." The conversation marked a turning point in Clara's thinking about the school's future. She'd been so focused on immediate needs and practical solutions that she hadn't considered the larger implications of what they'd created. Dry Creek Crossing was becoming a model for how education could anchor and accelerate frontier settlement. That was worth systematic investment, not just scattered charitable donations. She wrote to the association that evening, proposing a formal expansion plan that included a 3rd building dedicated to advanced studies, a small library separate from classroom space, and housing for teachers to attract quality candidates willing to commit to frontier service. The proposal felt ambitious to the point of audacity, but Caleb read it and simply nodded. This is what growth looks like. You've proven the concept, now you're scaling it to serve more people. Makes perfect sense. What if they reject it? What if they think I'm overreaching? Then you'll find another path forward. But I don't think they'll reject it. You've delivered results consistently for 3 years. That builds credibility. He bounced Rose on his knee while reading, the toddler giggling at the motion. Besides, the worst they can say is no. You've survived much worse than rejection. The association's response arrived 6 weeks later, and it exceeded even Clara's ambitious hopes. Not only did they approve the expansion plan, they'd secured matching funds from a Boston philanthropist interested in Western education and convinced the territorial government to designate Dry Creek Crossing as an official educational center with associated tax benefits for the settlement. The letter included one additional element that stopped Clara's breath: an invitation to present at the association's annual conference in Denver that October, sharing her methods with educators from across the territories. "They want me to speak," she told Sarah that evening, still processing the implications, in front of hundreds of teachers and administrators. "About our work here." "Of course they do. You're exactly the kind of success story they want to showcase." Sarah was sewing a new dress for Rose, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. "This is wonderful, Clara. Recognition for everything you've built." "It's terrifying. I've never spoken to a large audience. What if I freeze? What if I say something foolish and embarrass the association, the settlement, everyone who's supported this work? What if you're brilliant and inspiring and convince dozens of other teachers to replicate your approach, expanding quality frontier education across multiple territories?" Sarah looked up from her sewing with knowing eyes. "You're catastrophizing again. Stop imagining failure and start preparing for success." Over the summer months, while overseeing construction of the new school building, Clara drafted and redrafted her conference presentation. She practiced on Caleb, who listened patiently and offered suggestions about pacing and clarity. She practiced on Sarah, who critiqued her tendency to apologize for her own expertise. She even practiced on her older students, who found the whole endeavor fascinating and asked surprisingly insightful questions about her teaching philosophy. "Why do you teach us differently than Eastern schools teach?" Emma Johansson asked after one practice session. Clara considered the question carefully. "Because your reality is different. Eastern schools can assume certain resources and conditions, multiple teachers, age-segregated classrooms, extensive libraries, families with time and means to support homework. You don't have those luxuries. So I have to adapt methods to serve your actual circumstances while still maintaining rigorous standards. That requires different approaches. But we're learning the same things they learn, aren't we? We're not getting less education just because we're out here. You're getting different education, but not lesser education. In some ways, you're getting more. You're learning to think flexibly, to apply knowledge creatively, to work collaboratively across differences. Those are skills that will serve you regardless of what you do with your futures." Yet Emma absorbed this with the serious attention she brought to everything. "I want to be a teacher someday, like you. Come back here and teach, maybe, after I get proper training." The declaration hit Clara with unexpected force. Emma was 14 now, starting to think seriously about her future beyond childhood. The idea that she'd been inspired to pursue teaching, that Clara's work had sparked that ambition, felt like the highest possible validation. "You'd be an excellent teacher," Clara said honestly. "You're patient with younger students, you explain concepts clearly, and you genuinely care about learning. Those qualities matter more than any formal training." "But I should get the training anyway, shouldn't I? So I'm as prepared as possible?" "Yes. Experience and natural talent are valuable, but structured education gives you tools and frameworks that make you more effective. The combination of both is ideal." The conversation stayed with Clara through the following weeks as she refined her conference presentation. She'd been operating on instinct and improvisation for so long that she'd almost forgotten formal educational theory existed. But Emma's question had reminded her that good teaching required both: theoretical knowledge and practical adaptation, structured methodology, and creative flexibility. Construction on the new school building progressed rapidly through the summer, with nearly every able-bodied person in the settlement contributing labor or materials. The structure rose beside the existing buildings, connected by a covered walkway that would allow movement between spaces without exposure to weather. It was beautiful in its simplicity: sturdy construction, generous windows, a dedicated library space that made Clara's throat tight with emotion every time she saw it taking shape. "This is real," she said to Caleb one evening as they walked through the nearly complete building. "A proper school, not just a frontier improvisation. It was always real. This is just the physical manifestation of what you built through sheer will and competence." He pulled her close, and she leaned into his familiar solidity. "You should be proud, Clara. Not nervous about the conference or worried about maintaining standards, just proud of what you've accomplished." "I'm trying. It's just hard to reconcile who I was 3 years ago with who I am now. Sometimes it feels like two completely different people." "Maybe it is two different people. The one who arrived here was broken and lost. The one standing here now is confident and capable. Both are real, both are you. The difference is you chose which version to become." Rose's third birthday arrived in late August, celebrated with a small party that nonetheless felt significant. Watching her daughter blow out candles on Sarah's carefully baked cake, surrounded by friends and family who'd become the foundation of their lives, Clara felt the full measure of transformation settle into her bones. This child would grow up knowing nothing but the frontier, would think school bells and mixed-age classrooms and community barn raisings were normal. Her entire conception of the world would be shaped by the life Clara had chosen to build. "What are you thinking about?" Sarah asked, appearing beside her with cake and knowing observation. "About how different Rose's life will be from mine. How she'll never understand the constraints I grew up with, the expectations I had to escape. That's what progress looks like. Each generation building on what came before, expanding possibilities." Sarah watched Rose shriek with delight as Caleb pretended to steal her cake. "You gave her that foundation, the freedom to imagine futures you couldn't have imagined at her age. I hope it's enough." "It's more than enough. Stop questioning yourself and accept that you've done remarkably well by every measure that actually matters." September brought cooler temperatures and the start of the new term with 42 students, 11 more than projected, drawn by families who'd moved to the settlement specifically for educational access. Clara found herself managing not just teaching but coordination between 4 teachers, curriculum development for multiple grade levels, parent communications, and the administrative details of a genuine educational institution. She also found herself preparing for the Denver conference with increasing urgency as October approached. The presentation had been refined to 20 minutes, covering her core methodologies: mixed ability grouping, peer teaching, community engagement, resource adaptation, and assessment individualization. She'd practiced until she could deliver it smoothly, until the words felt natural instead of rehearsed. "You're ready," Caleb assured her the night before she was scheduled to depart for Denver. "You've been ready for weeks. Now you just need to trust yourself enough to do it." The journey to Denver took 3 days by stage and rail, each mile carrying Clara further from the familiar territory of her daily life. She'd been to the territorial capital once before, shortly after arriving in the West, but seeing it now with different eyes was disorienting. The city felt simultaneously too crowded and too structured, full of people rushing through lives that seemed disconnected from the elemental realities she'd grown accustomed to. The conference itself was held in a grand hotel that made Clara acutely aware of her practical frontier clothing and weathered hands. Educators from across the territories filled the halls, mostly men, mostly older, mostly looking at her with expressions ranging from curiosity to skepticism when they realized who she was. "Mrs. Ridge?" A young woman approached tentatively. "I'm Elizabeth Morrison. I've read your handbook 3 times. It's transforming how I approach teaching in my settlement outside Cheyenne." The encounter was the first of many over the next 2 days. Teachers sought her out between sessions, asking detailed questions about implementation, sharing their own challenges and adaptations, treating her like an authority worth consulting. Each conversation reinforced that what she'd built in Dry Creek Crossing mattered beyond her own settlement, that her improvisations had become methodology worth replicating. Her presentation was scheduled for the conference's final afternoon. Clara stood backstage watching the previous speaker finish, her heart hammering so hard she could barely hear the applause. Then her name was called, and she walked onto the stage facing an audience of perhaps 300 educators, all waiting to judge whether her frontier experiment had anything valuable to teach them. "My name is Clara Ridge," she began, her voice steadier than she felt. 3 years ago, I was a widow stranded in the Arizona territory with nothing but desperation and a dying horse. Today, I run a school that serves 42 students across 8 grade levels with 4 teachers and a community that's grown specifically because of educational access. I want to tell you how that transformation happened and what it might teach us about frontier education generally. She told them about the one-room schoolhouse built by ranchers who believed in possibility, about mixed-age instruction born from necessity that proved pedagogically superior to age segregation, about community engagement that made education everyone's responsibility rather than just the teacher's burden, about adapting Eastern methodologies to Western realities instead of forcing incompatible models onto frontier circumstances. Most importantly, she told them about her students, Emma Johansson dreaming of university, Tom Henderson mastering advanced mathematics, younger children learning to read because older students taught them with patience no adult could match. She made the abstract concrete, the theoretical practical, the methodology human. The applause when she finished was immediate and sustained. Questions followed, sharp, probing, genuinely interested questions that demonstrated the audience had been listening critically and found value worth pursuing. Clara answered as honestly as she could, acknowledging failures alongside successes, admitting uncertainty where it existed, refusing to present her approach as universally applicable while arguing it was universally adaptable. Afterward, educators surrounded her asking for additional details, requesting permission to visit Dry Creek Crossing, proposing collaborations and exchanges that could strengthen frontier education across multiple territories. Mrs. Whitfield from the association appeared through the crowd, her expression showing unmistakable pride. "That was exceptional, Mrs. Ridge. You've made a compelling case for adaptive methodology that I suspect will influence frontier education for years to come. I just told the truth about what works for us." That's what made it compelling. You weren't proposing theory, you were demonstrating proven practice. That's far more valuable. Mrs. Whitfield guided her away from the crowd toward a quieter corner. "The association would like to formalize your role as a consulting educator. We'd pay you to visit other frontier schools, help them implement similar approaches, essentially do for others what you've done in Dry Creek Crossing. Would you be interested?" The offer was simultaneously flattering and daunting. I'm not sure I could leave my own school regularly enough to be useful elsewhere. It wouldn't be constant travel, perhaps 3 or 4 trips per year, a week or 2 at a time. Your assistant teachers could manage the school in your absence, and the experience you'd gain observing other contexts would likely improve your own work. Mrs. Whitfield paused. "But more than that, Mrs. Ridge, you have something rare, the ability to translate educational theory into frontier practice effectively. That's desperately needed across the territories. We're asking you to share that gift more broadly." Clara thought about Emma Johansson wanting to become a teacher, about all the children in isolated settlements who deserved quality education but lacked teachers prepared to deliver it. If she could help develop those teachers, multiply her impact beyond her own classroom, wouldn't that be worth the sacrifice of occasional absences? "I'd need to discuss it with my husband and the other teachers, make sure the school could function without me for extended periods." "Of course, take time to consider, but I hope you'll say yes. You've proven yourself exceptional at this work. It would be a waste to limit your influence to a single settlement." The journey home felt different than the journey out. Clara carried not just the memory of successful presentation, but a growing sense of possibility about her role in frontier education. She'd started simply trying to survive, had evolved into teaching out of necessity, and now found herself positioned to influence educational development across entire territories. The trajectory felt impossible, yet each step had followed logically from the one before. Caleb met her at the stage stop, Rose balanced on his hip, his face breaking into a smile when he saw her approaching. "How was it?" he asked after kissing her soundly. "Overwhelming, successful, terrifying, all of it." She took Rose from his arms, burying her face in her daughter's hair for a moment of grounding comfort. "They want me to consult, travel to other schools, help implement our methods elsewhere, 3 or 4 trips per year." "What do you want?" It was so characteristically Caleb, not telling her what to do, not deciding for her, just asking what she actually wanted. Clara considered the question carefully as they walked toward the wagon. "I want to help. I want other children to have what our students have, but I don't want to neglect our school, our family, everything we've built here. Then we figure out how to balance both. Sarah can handle more ranch responsibility when you're gone. David Chen is perfectly capable of managing the school for a week or two. Rose is young enough that short absences won't damage our bond. He helped her into the wagon, then climbed up himself. The question isn't whether it's convenient. It won't be. The question is whether it's important enough to be worth the inconvenience. You think I should do it? I think you've never been satisfied with just personal success. You need your work to matter beyond yourself. This is an opportunity for exactly that kind of impact. He took the reins and started the horses moving. So yes, I think you should do it, but only if you want to, not because you feel obligated. Over the following weeks, Clara discussed the consulting proposal with everyone whose opinion mattered. Sarah, who enthusiastically supported it, David Chen, who assured her the school would thrive in her absences, Margaret Hartley, who observed that Clara had been preparing for exactly this kind of expanded influence, whether she'd known it or not, and her students, who responded with a mixture of pride that their teacher was important enough to consult elsewhere and concern about who would teach them when she was gone. "You'll still be our teacher, won't you?" Emma asked during one discussion. "Even if you're helping other schools?" "Always. Dry Creek Crossing is my home. This school is my primary responsibility. The consulting would be additional work, not replacement work." "Good. Because we need you here. You're what makes this place work." The comment, meant as reassurance, actually crystallized Clara's thinking. She wasn't what made the school work. The community's investment made it work. Dedicated teachers like David Chen made it work. Students committed to learning made it work. She'd started the process and maintained quality, but the institution had grown beyond any single person's indispensability. That realization was both liberating and slightly melancholy. She'd built something successful enough to survive without her constant presence, which meant she was free to expand her impact without guilt about abandonment. She wrote to the association accepting the consulting position, beginning in the new year. Her first assignment would be a struggling school outside Santa Fe that was attempting to implement her methods without adequate understanding of the underlying principles. The challenge energized her in ways she hadn't anticipated. Winter that year brought Clara's second pregnancy, discovered in late December and greeted with calm acceptance rather than the terror that had accompanied Rose's impending arrival. She knew what to expect now, understood the frontier realities of childbirth, trusted the community support that would carry her through. Caleb's reaction was quietly delighted. Sarah's was celebratory, and Rose's, when they explained she'd have a sibling, was suspicious but willing to be convinced. "Will it take my toys?" the 3-year-old asked seriously. "Not for several years," Caleb assured her. "By then, you'll be old enough to share willingly." The pregnancy progressed easily through winter and into spring. Clara continued teaching through March before reducing her schedule, training David Chen and the other teachers to manage full operations in her absence. Her first consulting trip had been postponed until after the baby's arrival, which suited everyone involved. The second child, a boy they named James Samuel Ridge, honoring both grandfathers, arrived in mid-June with far less drama than Rose's birth. Clara labored through a warm afternoon delivered by early evening and was back to review school records within the week despite Sarah's protests about resting properly. "You're supposed to take time to recover," Sarah scolded, finding Clara nursing James while simultaneously annotating curriculum plans. "I am recovering. I'm just also working because lying in bed doing nothing makes me restless." Clara shifted the baby to a more comfortable position. "Besides, the consulting trip is scheduled for August. I need everything organized before then." The trip to Santa Fe in late August was Clara's first extended absence from both the school and her family. She kissed Caleb and both children goodbye with a mixture of guilt and anticipation, promised Rose she'd return soon, and climbed into the stage with her traveling bag and presentation materials. The Santa Fe school was struggling exactly as reported, a dedicated teacher trying to implement mixed-age instruction without understanding how to manage the complexity, a community willing to support education but unclear about their role, students at wildly different levels with no systematic approach to addressing those differences. Clara spent a week observing, asking questions, and gradually proposing modifications that adapted her methods to their specific context. By the end of the visit, the teacher, a young man named Robert Martinez, had developed concrete strategies for managing his classroom more effectively. The community had organized support structures that made education a shared responsibility, and the students were showing signs of renewed engagement. "You've changed everything," Martinez said on Clara's final evening in Santa Fe. "Not by telling me I was doing it wrong, but by helping me understand how to do it better. That's a gift. You were already doing the hard work. I just helped you refine your approach." Clara meant it sincerely. Martinez had been drowning in good intentions without sufficient structure, exactly where she'd been 3 years ago. Helping him find that structure felt like closing a circle, passing forward the support she'd received. The pattern repeated over her next 3 consulting visits, to a mining town school in Colorado, a ranching community in New Mexico, and a newly established settlement in northern Arizona. Each context was different. Each teacher brought unique strengths and challenges, but the underlying principles Clara had developed in Dry Creek Crossing proved remarkably adaptable. Mixed ability grouping worked regardless of specific student composition. Peer teaching enhanced learning across all contexts. Community engagement transformed schools from isolated institutions into community centers. Most gratifyingly, Clara began hearing from teachers she'd consulted with months earlier, reporting sustained improvements in student achievement and community investment. The methodologies weren't just theoretically sound, they produced actual results that persisted beyond her direct involvement. By the time Rose turned 5 and started school as a student, rather than just a presence in her mother's classroom, Clara had established herself as the leading voice in frontier education. Her second handbook, focused specifically on teacher training and professional development, had been adopted by the territorial education system as required reading for new frontier teachers. Schools across the West were implementing variations of the Dry Creek model, and the settlement itself had grown to over 200 residents, many drawn specifically by educational reputation. One evening in late spring, as the valley bloomed with wild roses and the school year approached its end, Clara stood in the original schoolhouse, now used primarily for community meetings and special events, and let herself fully absorb what had been built. The single room where she'd first taught 13 students had spawned a 3-building campus serving 68 students with 6 teachers. The library she'd started with borrowed books now held over 500 volumes. Students who'd barely been literate 4 years ago were now reading advanced texts and planning for futures that extended far beyond frontier survival. Emma Johansson had been accepted to a teaching college in Denver and would leave in the fall to pursue the dream Clara had helped her imagine. Tom Henderson was working with an engineer surveying for the railroad, applying mathematics Clara had taught him to real-world projects. Even the younger students showed engagement and achievement that exceeded what most educators thought possible for frontier schools. "Proud of yourself yet?" Margaret Hartley asked, appearing in the doorway with her usual impeccable timing. "I'm getting there. It's taken a while to accept that this is real, that it's sustainable, that it matters." "Of course it matters. You've transformed this settlement from a barely surviving outpost into a thriving community. Education was the catalyst for everything else. The businesses, the families, the growth. You provided that catalyst." Margaret walked through the room, trailing her fingers along the desks that had held so many students. "I remember when you first arrived, half dead from dehydration and despair. If someone had told me then that you'd become the most influential educator in the territory within 5 years, I'd have thought them mad." "I would have thought them mad too," Clara admitted. "I was just trying to survive, build something small and manageable. But you built something transformative instead. That's what happens when talented people are given opportunity and support." Margaret turned to face her directly. "The Settlement Council voted last night. We're officially renaming this building. Going forward, it'll be known as Ridge Hall, in honor of you and Caleb and the foundation you've provided this community." Clara felt her throat close with emotion. "Margaret, that's not necessary. It's absolutely necessary. Caleb provided the land for the school, drove the construction, helped fund expansions. You provided the vision and execution that made the school exceptional. Together, you've given this settlement its identity and future. That deserves recognition." Margaret's expression softened. "Let someone honor your work, Clara. You've spent 5 years building things for others. Let others build something for you." The dedication ceremony for Ridge Hall took place on the last day of the school year, with the entire settlement gathered for speeches and celebration. Caleb stood beside Clara, both of them slightly uncomfortable with the attention, but moved by the community's affection and gratitude. "We didn't do this alone," Clara said when called upon to speak. "Every person here contributed to building something none of us could have created individually. That's what community means, collective effort toward shared goals. The school succeeds because all of you decided education mattered enough to invest in it. That's your accomplishment as much as it is ours." The applause suggested the community disagreed with her modest assessment, but Clara had said what needed saying. The success of Dry Creek Crossing wasn't about individual heroism. It was about collective commitment to something larger than personal survival. That evening, after the ceremonies ended and the crowds dispersed, Clara walked with Caleb up to the ridge overlooking the valley. They'd done this countless times over the years, but tonight felt different, like an ending and a beginning folded together. The settlement spread below them, lights flickering on as darkness fell. She could identify buildings by their positions: the school complex, the general stores, the houses clustered along the main street, the ranches scattered beyond. Each structure represented lives being lived, children growing up, futures being built on the foundation she'd helped create. "What are you thinking about?" Caleb asked, his arm around her shoulders against the evening chill. "About Crossroads. About the moment when you appeared through the heat haze and offered me water. How that single act of kindness led to everything else. You could have refused, could have insisted on pushing forward to Redstone Valley." "I could have. I'd be dead if I had." Clara leaned into his familiar solidity. "Instead, I chose to accept help, to consider alternatives, to build something new instead of clinging to something dead. That choice changed everything." "No regrets?" "None. Not about leaving Philadelphia, not about letting go of Samuel's dream, not about choosing you and this life and this impossible frontier community." She turned to face him fully. "I came here running from one life and got trapped trying to honor someone else's vision. You gave me permission to create my own instead. That's the greatest gift anyone's ever given me. You gave yourself that permission. I just offered water and pointed out the obvious. You offered hope when I'd run out. That's not obvious. That's everything." Clara kissed him softly, tasting 5 years of partnership and shared purpose. "Thank you for appearing when you did, for staying when you could have left, for building this life with me." "Best decision I ever made," Caleb said simply. "Though Sarah claims credit for most of it." Clara laughed, the sound carrying across the quiet valley. Below them, the settlement settled into evening rhythms, families gathering for supper, children called home from play, the ordinary rituals of community life. This was what they'd built together. Not perfection, not paradise, but something real and sustainable and worth the effort required to maintain it. 2 years later, on a bright autumn morning, Clara stood before her students, now 73 of them, spanning kindergarten through advanced secondary studies, and felt the familiar pull of purpose that had defined her life since that desperate crossroads 5 years ago. Rose was 7 and thriving in second grade, James was learning his letters at 4, and Clara was pregnant with their third child, due the following spring. The school had expanded again, adding a 4th building dedicated to sciences and advanced studies. 3 additional teachers had joined the faculty, drawn by reputation and the association's active recruitment. Emma Johansson had returned after completing her training and was teaching the primary grades with the same passion Clara had once brought to that work. The library held over 800 volumes, and students were producing work that rivaled anything coming out of Eastern schools. Dry Creek Crossing itself had been officially incorporated as a town, with a proper mayor and council, regular stage service, and a population approaching 400. The railroad was planning a spur line that would connect them to the main route within 2 years. Businesses were thriving, families were settling permanently, and the territorial government had designated them as a model community for frontier development. All of it, every building, every business, every family who'd chosen to settle here, could be traced back to the school Clara had started in desperation and built through determination. Education had been the catalyst that transformed a dying settlement into a thriving town, exactly as she'd hoped but never quite believed possible. "Mrs. Ridge?" A new student, recently arrived from Missouri, raised her hand tentatively, Is it true you almost died in the desert before you came here? Clara smiled, recognizing the mixture of curiosity and awe in the girl's expression. Yes, it's true. I was lost and alone and very nearly gave up. But someone helped me, and that help led to all of this. What made you decide to start teaching instead of just, I don't know, being normal? The question sparked laughter around the classroom, but Clara answered seriously. Teaching isn't separate from being normal. It's how I became myself. I'd spent my whole life being what other people expected, following paths other people chose. Teaching gave me the chance to build something that was entirely mine, that served others while also serving my own need for purpose. So you're saying we should all become teachers? Another student asked, slightly skeptical. I'm saying you should all find work that matters to you, that uses your talents in service of something larger than personal benefit. For me, that's teaching. For you, it might be medicine or ranching or building or any of 1,000 other possibilities. The specific work matters less than the commitment to doing it well and using it to contribute to your community. After class ended and students scattered to their various destinations, Clara stood in the quiet schoolhouse gathering her materials and thinking about that long-ago crossroads where she'd stood dying of thirst and despair. If she could speak to that woman now, what would she say? That the tragedy you're carrying isn't the end of your story, just the end of one chapter. That choosing to accept help doesn't make you weak, it makes you human. That building something new doesn't betray what came before. It honors it by proving you're strong enough to continue living. That the frontier is harsh and unforgiving, but it's also liberating in ways you can't yet imagine. That you have more courage than you know, more capacity than you've been allowed to develop, more potential than anyone ever told you was possible. That 5 years from now, you'll stand in a school you built, surrounded by students whose lives you've changed, married to a man who sees you clearly and loves what he sees, mother to children who'll grow up free of the constraints that limited you, and you'll finally understand what it means to be wholly yourself without apology or qualification. And that it will have been worth every difficult mile, every moment of doubt, every sacrifice required to get there. Ready to go home? Caleb appeared in the doorway, James balanced on his shoulders and Rose holding his hand. Clara looked at her family, husband and children, the life she'd chosen and built with intentionality and courage, and felt the familiar warmth of absolute certainty. Yes, she said, gathering her things and joining them. Let's go home. They walked together through the town as evening settled over the valley, past businesses and homes and the school complex that stood at the community's heart. The bell in Ridge Hall Tower rang out, marking the hour, its clear tone carrying across the landscape exactly as she'd once imagined. Children played in yards while parents called them to supper. Lights flickered on in windows. Smoke rose from chimneys. Life continued in all its ordinary, extraordinary beauty. Clara Ridge, once a desperate widow at a lonely crossroads, now a respected educator and community pillar, walked home with her family through the town she'd helped build, surrounded by the tangible evidence that choosing courage over despair, possibility over limitation, and hope over grief could transform not just a single life but an entire community. The frontier had taken everything from her and then offered everything back, transformed and enriched. She'd accepted both the loss and the gift, and in doing so had discovered who she actually was beneath all the expectations and limitations others had imposed. She was a teacher, a wife, a mother, a pioneer in both geography and methodology, a woman who'd looked at impossible circumstances and decided they simply required creative solutions. A survivor who'd become a builder, a mourner who'd become a creator, a follower who'd become a leader. She was Clara Ridge, and she was finally, completely, unapologetically home.